We're going to start the Budget Committee work session. And Mr. Ted Barkov, who is the Budget Committee Chair, is going to be running the work session this evening. Mr. Barkov.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, we're going to be offering an opportunity for all board members to bring forward their ideas about potential amendments. But first, I'd like to offer Ms. Quinn an opportunity to review a couple of items that are sort of late-breaking news, just to make sure everybody has that information.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff. We went ahead and posted 2 additional attachments this afternoon, and one has to do with some additional savings that we could recognize going into 2015, and then the other one is showing some additional salary cost options. So we're going to go over attachment 5 first. There we go. So late breaking news, we just heard from the county late last week that they are going to be refunding the bonds that we owe on the Gatehouse Administration Center. So we actually pay for the debt service on the Gatehouse building, and based on the current market conditions, they project that we can save up to $300,000. The bonds will not be refinanced until June, though, so we won't really know the specific amounts, but if the market conditions stay the same, we will be saving $300,000 from 2015 on to 2033 when the bonds mature. And then we were able to identify some additional savings for the out-of-school support as a result of implementing some of the in-school suspension support at each of our high schools, and that nets us $200,000. And then we believe we could also reduce a half a position for the in-school suspension support for Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, generating $100,000. So as you could see, there's $600,000 that we can recognize as additional savings. That is an adjustment from what I presented last Thursday night. So this is available going into the final approval for on next week. And then the next document, which is attachment 4, we had some questions about what the costing information is for the salary step implementation. Originally in the presentation last Thursday, we did include a recommendation to do step in November. We had a question that asked for what would be the cost if we were to accelerate that step 1 month. So that would be a step implementation in October. And if we did that, that would be an additional $4 million that would be required to do the step in October. And then if we were to do step in September, that would be an additional $8 million from what was presented in the 2015 budget for information at the last week's meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Quinn. Mr. Moon, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, I had one quick question on that half a position savings of $100,000. I just want to make sure that probably you use a rounding factor to come to 200,000, because I don't want public to think one position equates to $200,000.
So it would be a half a position, so it does round. So if you look at the out-of-school support savings, that is also a rounded up to the next $100,000. So half a position for the TJ in-school suspension would be a little bit over $50,000.
A little bit over $50,000.
Yeah, but because we are rounding to the millions, it rounds to a 0.1.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, you had a question.
I just have a quick question on the incremental, Ms. Quinn. Under the second column, the incremental cost for moving step to October, at the bottom table where it says 2.8 million, 0.3 million, and 0.9 million under other, those are all scaled employees. That's not the U.S. employees, right?
The other is U.S. scale employees. So that would be everybody other than the teacher scale employees, IA scale employees. So that would be everybody on a U.S. scale. So if you, some of the examples are, it will be your principals, your psychologists, social workers, clerical, custodian.
So these are 12-month employees.
There are some 11 and 10-month employees as well. So if you look at psychologists and social workers, they have a less than 12-month contract, but they're on a U.S. scale. So the way this is costed is based on the employee scale plan. So anybody who is on a teacher scale, 10-month or 11-month is included in that category. IA scale, the same. Anybody that's on a 10 or 11th or 12-month would be on that scale. Everybody else, 10-month, 11-month, or 12-month, would be on that other, which includes U.S. scale as well as the transportation bus drivers.
So there's nobody who's not, under that second column, there's nobody who isn't changed from the first column. I know that was worded very, that was not,
But
my best
that's
articulate.
correct. So everybody who is eligible to receive STEP will receive STEP with the $4 million cost for the October implementation. But if you were to say just the teacher scale employees, the cost would be $2.8 million.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I should point out that I believe Ms. Dernack-Koufax will be here late, and Ms. Hines has encountered some obstacles getting here, so we hope that she's able to get here. But with that, we'll begin to move on. So I'm going to begin. Let me review the ground rules. Oh, Dr. Garza, please.
I'm sorry, Susan, I was going to have you just real quickly, because I know many of you have submitted budget questions over the last couple of days or so, and there's been quite the volume of them. So I wanted Susan just real quickly to kind of give a status. I mean, they're working away at them as fast as they can. So could you address that, Susan?
Sure. We are hoping to have all the questions answered by midday tomorrow so that you can go ahead and submit your amendments, but we know we have few that are still outstanding. I believe we are ready to address some of them tonight, and those relate to e-card. I think there was a question from Ms. Schultz related to e-card. I believe we are ready to address that. We just don't have a formal response prepared. We have some of the other questions that relate to, I believe, some pre-K implementation. We don't have the formal response prepared, but we are prepared to answer some of those questions as well. So as the discussion progresses tonight, if you have any specific questions, please let us know.
Okay, so the format tonight is we're going to go around the table once, and each member will be given an opportunity to present any ideas they are considering as offering amendments, and there will be as much discussion as the board wishes to engage in to discuss any of the ideas that each member brings forth. So while each of you will have a chance to lead off with your ideas, everyone will have plenty of opportunity to comment on everything that you're hearing here. And as I advertised, we are going to go in seniority order, so I'm going to recognize Mrs. Strauss first.
For starters, first, I just have a question. I understand that we are going to be able to open two additional Head Start classes in the fall. And my question is how we're doing that. I understand it's a cost-neutral situation.
The two new classes for the fall will be funded through Title I funding.
Right. Okay, thanks. And I don't know if Dr. Garza later on you will respond to some of the issues raised at the public hearing. Later on, perhaps. Yes. Okay, thanks.
Any follow-on comments to what Mrs. Strauss just raised? Okay. Ms. McLaughlin.
I guess what I'm wondering, Ms. Strauss, is you raised that question because it's your feeling that since we'll have those two new classes, then from your perspective, we don't need to.
I was just a clarification, because I don't think we had talked about that
Right.
publicly, and there is a concern for pre-K expansion, and it's just an important piece of information that people need to know, that we in fact will be able to offer 2 new Head Start classes, cost neutral, it'll be paid out of Title I, so it's an important piece of information.
Right. I just was wondering, since it's very helpful that you had us bring that information out tonight, but I guess I was trying to get a sense, as we're all trying to get a temperature of where each other is on things, do you have any other amendments you're considering?
Not at this moment.
Okay.
Okay, next I'm going to recognize Mr. Moon.
Thank you. When you say seniority, it's not age, right?
No, this is not
Okay,
age.
thank you. I am still waiting for some information to come from staff on early literacy program, including whether there's a wait list, how that is being advertised or promoted, and how many parents are being served by the program, etc. So I am pondering on a potential, depending upon what the information, is brought to us. I am considering a small amendment at this point, but I'm gonna have to wait until I get the information. But overall, the program itself, overall program is, based upon the little bit of information that I have is, countywide, it's about $300,000 currently.
Okay, before moving on, I just want to make sure every board member has an opportunity to potentially comment on Mr. Moon's. Ms. McLaughlin.
Briefly, Mr. Moon, was this in relation to the wonderful speakers who came out at the public hearing and shared with us the value of the
Yes, there
program?
were three speakers at the public hearing with a number of other parents who also seem to be supporting the advocacy by those 3 speakers. So I decided to look into further about the program and waiting for some additional information from staff.
Okay, I just wanted to share with you that when I was touring one of my schools in Braddock District, I saw one of those early literacy programs in action and have heard good things about it. And so I would be very interested to learn more about your advocacy once you get the information.
Okay. I think they are providing this program in 3 different languages, and perhaps about maybe a couple of dozen sites. But I need to have more information before I can elaborate on my potential amendment.
Okay, and next is Mrs. Smith.
I don't have any amendments.
Okay, then I will go to Mr. Stork. Mr. Stork passes, so I'm going to go to, there's Ms. Evans. Ms. Evans, you're next.
Service, not age, right?
Ryan said beauty, so, I'll go with that.
Well, it may be a surprise, but I do have a few things I want to talk about. And I want to start by saying that I appreciate very much the budget this year. I think that Dr. Garza has done an excellent job with staff and with the community in putting forward a very solid package. And so I am not intending to poke holes or try to diminish the value of this very, very excellent document. But what I do want to do is focus our attention a little bit more on the revenue side of the house. I feel in the past we have spent so much time and focus on reductions that, that maybe we haven't looked at or at least had discussions about areas where we could raise some revenue. Yes, we all know the Dillon rule limits our ability to raise revenues, but I would argue there are some things within our control that we should at least discuss. For example, the middle school after-school program. In our budget questions, number 40, Supervisor Cook asked about that, and he said, if we charged $250 per student for those who can afford to pay it, how much revenue could be generated? And the answer was $2.5 million. To me, that's real money and deserving of at least a discussion about it. So that's one that, and I've talked with staff a little bit about this, and I know it's, as always, a little more complicated than it seems at first blush. This is a program that's a joint program with the county. But I do believe that that's the kind of thing that we should be now beginning to talk about. I believe that it's time that we start setting boundaries on what is clearly within our mission to provide as a free service to the people in our community, K through 12 or whatever else we deem. But perhaps after school activities might be things, if it's legally allowed and we feel like maybe we should consider it, I believe that that's something that we should be talking about. And so that would be my intention, is to continue to work through to see whether that's viable, to see if we might be able to charge some fees for middle school after-school programs. And there's information on the website for anybody who wants more information. It varies by school. And again, for the folks who are the neediest in our communities, the fees would not be charged. And that also brings me to the next point. And since I've raised that issue, then I wonder what else is there that we haven't looked at. And I believe that my colleague, Ms. McLaughlin, will be pointing to the APIB fees as perhaps another potential source of revenue. And I'll say in closing, I do have other ideas, but I'll wait for the go-backs. But I do want to say that I feel like the LCI makes a statement about our community, and it says, you all are pretty affluent. You have an ability to pay versus some of the neighboring jurisdictions. Now, we all know that we have pockets of poverty, but if we're given our resources based on our ability to pay, then shouldn't we be considering the ability to pay of some of our population? Because I would believe that for many, many people out there, they'd be happy to pay it, whatever the fee is for whatever the activity is that they're going to be doing anyway. So I'm just raising those issues for the board to consider. And if you're wondering, gee, where's she going with this? What does she want to do with these increased revenues? I'd like to establish a reserve for the following fiscal year, because I know we're facing significant challenges there. So I'll stop now. I do have other ideas if nobody else has any, but I'll yield the floor.
So Mrs. Reed, first of all, I'm just going to quote my daughter and say, Dad, you fail at life. So I'm sorry I got the order mixed up. So actually, how about if we do this? Because I was intending to have everybody go around once. If we stop and get a sense of the board about the ideas that you've brought out now, and then come back to the other items on your list. Okay. So are there comments related to the topics that Mrs. Reed brought forward? I'm seeing Mr. McElveen and Mrs. Strauss, and who else did I miss? Okay, well, we'll go with that. Mr. McElveen?
So I have a question about the middle school after-school programs, and maybe Ms. Panarelli could answer this. When we established those, what was the idea behind that program?
So the after-school programs initially were an effort to try to address some issues around gang involvement and just issues around what kids were involved in when they were out of school in the early afternoon from the middle school programs, because you don't have the same sports and those things that you have at a high school level. They then spread beyond the schools that were originally targeted to other schools. At this point, there are 3 schools, at least, I think 3 schools, where much of the funding actually comes from 21st Century grants, which are a federal grant as opposed to from the county. Those tend to be the schools that have a higher incidence of kids with low income.
Very helpful, thank you.
Mrs. Strauss?
I'm just wondering, since you are looking at other fee areas, are you considering going back to athletic fees? Because that is another area, painful, but where we are allowed by law to do that.
That wasn't on my short list, but I would think that to do this in a deliberative way, we might take a look at everything that we do and, and at least get it on a list and have some discussion about it. But at this time, I mean, we've been down that road before, and, my intention is not to create a huge uproar in the 11th hour that would, have ripple effects all through the community. That's not my intention at all. But it is an opportunity for us to perhaps, brainstorm and make a list about those activities that we currently do pay for in our community, at the very least, so that the community is aware of, what we are doing for them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm not sure if I saw Mr. Stork ready to make a comment on this. Or?
I'll make a comment
Sure,
on this.
please.
I think the exercise is important. I think there are some opportunities there. I think nobody would welcome the opportunity to pay more, but I think the reality is our budget situation compels us to balance the additional costs that some families would have to pay with the needs that it would help us satisfy. So I'm very willing to explore. I don't know, aside from the AP/IB fees that are on the table for this year, I'm not sure I'm ready to look at this year's budget for the other fees, but I'm very focused on the AP/IB fees because they're already on the table as cuts. So middle school, after school, I'm very much aware of why we started that. I think it's compelling why we have it. I think we probably need a work session on it to find out where are we with the program itself. I know there's a lot of value, a lot of benefits to it, but there's also costs. And again, we're getting into that cost-benefit analysis, and I think we need to take a look at that. So I'm very committed to looking at that. The PSAT, I'm probably less interested in because it is something that we view as part of an overall developmental thing we want kids to do to help them get more comfortable taking tests. But the flip side of that is because SATs and ACTs are different than and they're changing that need, then, maybe there is an argument to be made at least to take a look at, or is there something better that would help prepare kids for, the SATs, ACTs if they do it. So it's probably absolutely committed to having a work session discussion. I think it's valuable that we do this and we get input from principals and others about that cost benefit. But I think we need to look at everything, and I wouldn't stop with those, but those are the ones that are, I think, most obvious, so I support that.
Okay, I think I have Ms. McLaughlin next to be followed by Mrs. Smith. Ms. McLaughlin.
In terms of what Ms. Reed had said, I think I am leaning toward what Mr. Stork discussed with the middle school program. I think it would be very helpful as a system that we understand how much it's utilized and where and by whom. My children did a little bit of it at Frost Middle School, so I have just a small exposure to it. My concern with charging a fee is that I would worry that for some families, the children did it sort of as a little bit of a filler between waiting to go to their after-school sports practices or other activities they did. And I think it was a great way for our children to spend time with their classmates who maybe they don't live near, but it really enables students across all socioeconomic backgrounds to spend time together after school in these settings. And so I kind of would worry, if some families might say, well, at that cost, I'll just have my child take the bus home or whatever, and we might see those dwindle. And I think there's a benefit to having all children participate. I wouldn't want it to become one of those situations where the families who have to pay a fee pull out, and then the families who have sliding fee scale stay, and then I just wonder about what the effect would be for all the children not having that time together after school. So I would want to maybe look at that a little more. To what Ms. Strauss brought up about the athletic fees, and maybe Ms. Quinn, you can help clarify a little bit, but what I recall from the athletic fees, one of the reasons I became less a fan of it, because I was more than happy to pay the athletic fee for my own children who played 3 varsity sports a year each. So we paid plenty for those, and I thought it was reasonable. But I worried about the administrative overhead costs that we gross about 1.8 million, I remember was one estimate, but then by the time our school administration had to take in, process all the fees and all that kind of stuff, the net was, I think, closer to $1 million. So we were losing, as I recall, up to $500,000 in, having to pay out to different administrators to, to process it. At one point, we were giving extra money to each of our high schools to help collect with the fees. So I think before we go back to athletic fees, and I don't have a problem with it, because any of us who have children who play sports know that up until high school, what we pay for our youth recreation clubs is typically about $185 per season in those sports. So, Ms. Quinn, before I continue trying to recall things, is that something you feel comfortable commenting on now, or maybe you could get back to us on that? But that's my hesitancy on athletic fees, is that unlike the AP and IB test fees, where it wouldn't be us administering, it's just we're directing our families directly to go pay for your AP and IB test fees, and that's how Montgomery County does it. But the athletic fees, it's different, correct?
I would have to get back to you on the specifics of the athletic fees. There was some hiccups, I think, on collecting the athletic fees, and we did provide some additional funding to the high schools. I believe it was about $10,000 per high school to help mitigate some of the additional workload. However, we were collecting athletic fees centrally. So we actually had a portal where parents could either submit their checks on a credit card. So we did get much better at collecting the athletic fees toward the end. Regarding the AP and IB fees and the collection process, to be honest, I'm not sure we have actually thought through whether or not those fees will be sent directly to the College Board, or if we would actually flow through the system. So I can't say, but obviously if that option is available, that would be more efficient for the school system to send it directly. But I'm not sure we have actually worked through that process yet.
Well, and I won't take away from Ms. Reed's items on the table right now. I'll bring more of this up when I get my turn. But I think it would be really important for us to have real clarity about any fees that we charge, what is the gross fees that we draw in, but what's the net that we actually have based on staffing time to process those fees, I think. Because to me, that was then, I hate to draw away funding from our families and then have it's just getting lost in red tape. So that's very helpful. I appreciate that. And then Ms. Reed, I think one of the things that when you were talking about some of the other fees, one thing I would just add to it is I think looking at the PSAT, Mr. Stork was saying, he thinks it's really helpful. But again, I think looking at the fact that the ACT is now beginning to overtake the ACT, and again, thinking about my own experience with taking the PSAT, I would be more comfortable, again, as a county, that we pay for PSAT on a sliding fee scale for those who need it. But otherwise, depending on the dollar amounts, it's another area of cost savings. So again, I guess the question goes back to Ms. Quinn. Have we ever costed out what it is for our system to pay for the PSAT?
If I recall, I believe it was very minimal. I want to say around $130,000 for PSAT fees.
Yeah, I seem to recall it wasn't an area that we realized was the right rock to turn over and start to charge for. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Smith, and then Mr. Moon. Mrs. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff. I guess it concerns me that we would start this discussion 1 week before we vote on this budget. I don't think we can get enough information. I think it causes angst with community members. So I don't even know if it's something with the middle school after-school programs that I'd want to look to in the future, but I think it just for me, raises an issue now that we really don't have enough time to research about and creates more issues. So I'm not comfortable with it at all. Thank you.
Mrs. Reed, I think you wanted to comment on that.
Yes, I'm glad you raised that, because I think that what I was really trying to do is approach this in now our multi-year budgeting frame of mind and really try to focus in not so much in the short term, but things that I believe we should be thinking about and exploring today in the hopes that perhaps next year we can identify the savings, but be very thoughtful about it. So if I gave the wrong impression, I very much appreciate you saying that, Mrs. Smith, because that is my intention, is to get people thinking, but not necessarily acting.
Mr. Moon.
Mrs. Smith basically, said what I wanted to say, and thanks for clarification by Mrs. Reed. Especially when we talk about a financial burden on the families, if something new comes up at the very last minute, it will be unfair to those families who may have to end up paying for it without giving them enough time and opportunity to even come to, like last night, the public hearing and share their thoughts on those items. So I suggest to my colleagues that if any of you is considering those additional source of revenue, potential source of revenue in crafting as the revenue source for any of the amendments, that if that additional source of revenue has not been brought to public's attention yet, probably we may want to defer that discussion for the future years rather than doing it for the next year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moon. So, Mrs. Reed, did you want to go through some more of your ideas? Or would you like to pass and move on? It's your choice.
I'm sure there are others that have ideas, and I think it would probably be the right thing to do is to pass and come back to me. I don't want people to feel like I'm completely monopolizing the microphone here, and I'm certain that my colleagues have great ideas that we should discuss as well. So I'll pass, and you can come back to me.
Okay. I appreciate your generosity. So now, Ms. Evans, I get to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Velkoff. I would say that as you can see from my budget question that I shared with Ms. Derenak-Kovacs and Ms. Hines, my greatest concern is with some specific schools and how some of the new formulas impact specific schools, particularly high-needs schools. So I have been talking with the superintendent about what we would possibly be able to do with those that are unexpectedly hard hit. And so at this point, I'll say I continue to have a concern about certain schools where the formula is hitting very hard, and I'm going to continue to have a conversation on that. But at this point, I don't have an amendment on it. I do want to raise another issue. We are seeing losses in custodial staff. Part of this was because of the reorganization that was recommended by the audit, the state efficiency audit. I do think we have to be very careful where those hit as well, and again, look for any unintended consequences, in particular for schools with a lot of trailers. They have particular needs, so I think that's an area that we should be cognizant of when, and again, this isn't an amendment, at least at this point, but I raise it because as we're making these cuts, I think we have to be looking very carefully at areas of concern. I did have one question, and that has to do with just the information that we got today on TJ, and I did ask a question about this just a minute ago, but does TJ actually need any in-school support? I could see, I don't know that they do.
Well, my initial reaction was the same way, but I think the team has since, contemplated the fact that we're looking at this more broadly than just traditional in-school suspension, but really at more of an intervention, behavioral support, including mental health and wellness, and how do we support students. And so they felt like a part-time, at that school would subsequently also help with an intervention piece in terms of student stress and supporting students.
So these positions are not just in-school suspension,
Well,
they're
there's-
also, they're mental health and wellness as well?
Well, what we're saying is behavioral support, okay? For an example, restorative justice, you know, we could train them in the summer. They could be a support for helping train their teachers at the campus level. Oftentimes, you know, teachers, the advisory group concept of the middle school, you come together and you talk about kids that are struggling. They can help us move some of that work forward. So they wouldn't, always be an in-school suspension, right? There are other ways that they can use that resource if they don't have school kids in that needing that service at that time. Does that make sense?
I can see that if there's the flexibility to do that. I mean, certainly anything that supports the mental health of our high school students, I think, is valuable, and it's probably good for us then to define those roles in such a way that they can be broader and used more broadly as needed.
Yes, in fact, I met with high school principals this morning. They're very anxious to know about this particular position. They are very well aware that we need to design this in such a way that it's a quality program. They're not meant to be mental health specialists, but I do think there's ways that they can help support and keep a record of kids that we need to be providing support to and helping with that, because that is a concern for our principals as well.
And actually, that raises then another, and this may all be a very good thing, because some principals had alcohol and drug counselors there in the school, and I know when they lost them, they missed them a great deal. And some of them have traded positions in order to get some. So if these positions were the kind of things that could even do that sort of work, that might be valuable too. And let each, if there was a broad enough definition of this, I mean, are you anticipating that it would be broad enough to deal with that or no?
We're still seeing it as behavioral intervention specialist, helping teachers with classroom management, really helping with behavior management and working with kids. So I don't want to imply that they would become mental health specialists, but I think they do help from a team perspective, help support students. With that said, you know, our schools, in fact, I visited with Ms. McLaughlin because she serves on the county committee, and I just went blank.
The Skype or whatever
Skip.
that is? Skype.
Right, because the alcohol and drug abuse counselors were such a valuable resource.
Yes.
We need to continue to bring that up to our county, because principals are saying that was such a valuable resource, and our psychologists, school psychologists and social workers are under a lot of strain at our high schools particularly right now. And so this will not take, that won't completely
Take the place.
Yeah, that won't fill that void. So I think we still need to continue to talk about that with the county.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will mention my longstanding interest in moving toward a time when our parent liaisons are fully on staff and no longer hourly. I look back at my question on this last year and see that the cost of doing that would be 1.2, or at least a year ago was 1.2 million. So in taking Mrs. Reed to heart in terms of thinking long term, I hope we will all be thinking long term about how we can accomplish that goal, because these are very critical positions at a number of our schools, at a number of our high needs schools. And that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. So at this point, it's the remaining 6 grizzled veterans of the class of 2011. And the order is indeterminate. Now, the order I intended to use was Ms. McLaughlin, then Ms. Hines, Ms. Derenak Kofax, Ms. Schultz, Mr. McElveen, and then myself. I got a signal from Ms. McLaughlin that she would like to defer until later. So with Ms. Hines not here. Now, Ms. Derenak Kofax, I know you just arrived. Are you prepared to speak to us, or would you like to pass?
Let me pass for this moment, but I was watching you all the first 15 minutes as I was drying out, so my apologies for that. I had some parental duties that required me on a soccer field that was where it was pouring rain, so I took a little time to
Okay.
So what we're doing, just for clarification, is you're going through everyone and they're presenting where potential amendments, or were they continual questions?
Yes, so every board member has an opportunity to bring forward any ideas that they're thinking of in terms of amendments, or even just things that are budget related that they'd like to raise awareness about. And then the board can comment as much as members wish, and then we move on.
You know what, I'm prepared to speak then
Okay.
on this particular one. Ms. Hines and I were thinking about offering an amendment utilizing the savings from the bond savings. And of course, it's not formalized yet because it doesn't need to be till tomorrow. However, we were thinking of utilizing funding and then going to the VPI match for an additional pre-K classroom. So that's our thought.
Okay, so if I got that correctly, you would like to use, I believe the number is $300,000, right, to fund more preschool classes and taking advantage of the VPI money. at the
Right.
same
I
time.
don't believe we would be utilizing that entire amount. Our VPI, I believe VPI gives us about $3,000 per child, and the classroom size is around 17. So we're working out the numbers. We're thinking that we would need about $180,000 of that $300,000 to fund the classroom, and our cost would be about $10,000 then per child.
So before I recognize other board members, I'll mention that we did have some news that there's some Title I money that's going to go towards, if I heard correctly, 2 Head Start classes. Is that right? Yeah.
Too. So
Okay.
this would
And
be
this
for
would be in addition
this
to
would
that.
be an additional. This
Okay.
would be an additional third.
So
that could
comments and opinions for Ms. Derenak Koufax, and I'll start with Ms. McLaughlin.
I'm very interested in what you are considering. I've asked a couple budget questions about the pre-K funding costs in general. Yesterday at the SCIP meeting, I spoke to 2 different individuals who work on pre-K funding in the county, and they also were going to be giving me some numbers because as I understood with the Virginia pre-K initiative, this isn't necessarily where we're doing a Head Start classroom. We could be doing grants so that children can attend a accredited preschool in the community. And that is what's very compelling to me, because those programs are several $1,000s a student, not $13,000 to $16,000 a student. So that's one of the things that, I'm just wondering, as I heard you say that you would look at funding where we could maybe just add another classroom, but then that's based on that sort of Head Start model of each child's going to cost between $13,000, as opposed to the grants or the scholarships where they can go to an accredited preschool in our community.
Well, this would be, yes, the Virginia Preschool Initiative, oftentimes, if you walk into a classroom, so I'll give my one school as an example. If you walk into one of my schools, Lynbrook, and or Crestwood, it's Crestwood, that's that one. There's probably several pre-K classrooms in there, and they're seamless as to which one is funded by Title I funds and which one is funded by the Virginia Preschool Initiative. So these are all very high quality, very strong curriculums. It's just that the funding model is different. So where we have additional funding for Head Start, what I understood Mr. Valkoff say, this is another funding. And if you do listen to some of our Virginia legislators, they talk about how Fairfax County leaves pre-K money on the table all the time. And that's because our match is much higher, just our costs are much higher up here. So while some localities in Southern Virginia are able to utilize the match, it's not as great an amount that they have to service. So right now, we felt that we could add an additional classroom. And then I have a question back to you. what has the county, I know they talked about funding that there's $700,000 for instructional services, but I don't believe they were adding any pre-K classrooms in their budget. Is that correct?
My understanding of that 700,000, it was to fund several positions that will help with visiting, various child care settings and trying to enhance instruction for
Right.
those students. Yes, so
And in
not
some
adding.
neighborhood school readiness teams,
Right.
because they
Yep.
work in tandem with our, with Miss Maura Burke and Kim Dockery's office, they work with them, so the readiness team, so that there would be more, I think they're adding readiness teams from what I heard. So this one would, it's a small thing, but we felt something that, this would be our 8th classroom or 9th maybe that we've added over a 2-year period, where the county has not added any pre-K classrooms over the last 2 years. So we continue to do this because we see this as, in the end, a cost savings for us, and we want to work very diligently. Even though it's incremental, we felt that this small amount of money, once we thought it would be workable and usable.
Well, one thing that I shared with Dr. Garza, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday in this SCIP meeting, which, this has brought together, county members and, school system employees, and really allowed sort of this dialogue of a joint partnership of saying, how can we collaborate on services to help successful children and youth? And without question, as you pointed out, looking at the pre-K initiative in this county, I think it needs to be very much a shared partnership. And Dr. Garza and I are both saying, if we look at the model that was used with the artificial turf fields, where we both boards basically said we're going to commit dollars to help our schools and help our community with those recreational facilities, but we brought a shared amount to the table. It was a shared investment, and I think that's what needs to happen with the pre-K initiative in this county. I will say, in listening to Supervisor Hudgens, who was there yesterday, from her perspective, they did bring $700,000 to their budget for FY 2015, and I'm thinking it would look favorably on us to stand by our support for it and consider, bringing up to $700,000 to the table too. So we look like this is an extra initiative they're taking to FY 2015, and so are we. And it might set that foundation then going forward of, for FY 2016, that we are both committed to it, because they do watch us carefully, and while they'll understand that we added 2 classes, they'll say, you got that through outside funds. Where did you put a commitment with your own dollars in FY 2015 for adding preschool? So when you mentioned $180,000, I was wondering, why not go for the full $300,000 and get that many more students off the wait list? I mean, I hear what you're saying about taking a step forward, but I'm wondering if we found that, or we're being given that money back from the county, what a great way to then direct it towards something that we know is so critical. And with over 900 children now, I'm told yesterday, that are still on this wait list for pre-K, every child we pull off that wait list, we impact. But I didn't hear you mention, and I'm wondering if anyone here at the board table can clarify, as I'm waiting for the information to come from me, isn't there some program where we could pay scholarships for children to go to the accredited preschools as opposed to a Head Start or a VPA matched spot? Because it still is extremely expensive to do it that way.
Sorry, Ms. Smith, I was slow to react. So Ms. Smith, you're next, and then Mr. McElveen.
This hasn't come up specifically with this issue. It's come up with other things for the board to pay for. I don't believe we could use our revenue as a grant to somebody to go into another school program. So that's my understanding, but we definitely would need that answer. But when it's come forward about giving money to other organizations, that's not something we're typically able to do.
Right, and
So I would be very surprised if we could do that.
Yes, and Megan, I think, some of our highest quality pre-K programs are are funded by this BPI and Head Start. And the Head Start programs that we have, I know Head Start has gotten rather, in some media reports, a bad rap, but they are managed here quite well through the school system, through the county, and as I said, if you look into them, they're kind of a seamless melding between the two. It's just where the funding comes from. But they are high quality programs with accredited teachers, and they, they are some of the highest quality programs out there.
I'm glad you
So, Ms.
raised
McLaughlin,
that
I'm
because,
going
no,
to
I
I'm going
just,
to intercede
I
and ask
know,
you to
but
wait.
no, Mr.
I'm
Velkoff, the
losing
problem
control
is,
here, so I want to go
you're
to
not
Mr.
losing
Mackle.
control. It's important that there at least be clarity, because this happened multiple times. I am not saying that Head
Mrs.
Start
McLaughlin,
isn't
I would
quality.
appreciate it
It's
if you would
looking at
respect that I'm
how
running
many
the
children we
meeting.
can get into schools. But it keeps being said over and over again as if I'm saying Head Start's not top quality. It is. It's where can we maximize seats? That's all. It's not about quality.
Mr. McElveen.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff. Question for staff. Have we identified where these 2 extra classes are going for next year?
Well, we're currently working with ISD, with Moore Burke. One of the things that we did was some of the questions that came up was where could we actually put them where we didn't have overcrowding. The other concern was they require a bathroom facility. So we're trying to work through those logistics, and I think we're narrowing it down, but we're not quite there yet. We've started since January, by the way. Staff started working together to try and work through this. So
Well-
there's quite a bit of lead-up time, I guess. Excuse me.
No, apologize. And there's also, they've been looking at where do we have wait lists and where are those students located in proximity, if I'm not mistaken, is that correct?
Right, we've been looking at this actually since Ms. Quinn and I and Ms. Hines, we've been looking at since I think our initiation to this board. And, we did look last year about how could we take everybody off the wait list. And even if we did have the funding, we don't have the facilities. And that's why I love the idea of the the SKIP program, because that's where we're going to get that synergy between our two boards, where sometimes it's not just the funding of the program, it's where can we actually put this program. And so just when we have areas, like the Bailey's area where we can't even find space for another elementary school, we're looking for areas like that, I know. And there's other creative ways to do it, and that's what we're finding out as well. We funded a early literacy program for Spanish-speaking children at a library program through Title III funds. So, and it's another parental, there's wraparound services and a required parental component, which I think for some of our children is very, very important, that the parents understand the importance of education and they're getting their own education while we are. So there's other ways to do it, and we thought we would be cautious adding one, working with facilities, working with IS, and see where we could go from there.
So, I 100% support your passion on this and the reasoning behind this. But the fact that we've been working on it since January and even before then to find 2 classrooms makes me very hesitant to commit money at this time to a 3rd classroom where we don't even have space. And it's not that I don't support it, it's just hopefully over the next week we can have more clarity on where that's going to go.
Yeah, hopefully we can.
Ms. Evans. And then Mrs. Strauss.
Yes, in following up on that, of course, the longest wait lists, I believe, are in the Bailey's area. Are they still in the Bailey's area? Does anyone know?
They are. Cluster 3 has the longest wait list of 203 students in Cluster 3.
And that's probably largely Culmore and Annandale. So I wanted to ask Mr. Plattenberg, he started to answer this question before, if the opening of Bailey's Upper then does provide more space for classes there where they're most needed. Is that a possibility? Is that something you're looking at?
Well, what we're looking at is we're looking at definitely putting the classes that were displaced, that were there, back into the Bailey's Elementary School.
in the original
Original,
Bailey's?
yes, ma'am.
And would that building now sustain more preschool?
I don't believe so, but we're certainly going to take a look at it. I don't know what exactly the difference is off the top of my head of the capacity and the projection, the actual enrollment.
Okay, I guess I would ask that that be something that we look at, because since that is where the highest lists are, and hopefully we are opening up a significant amount of space in the original Bailey's, I would hope we would be able to find some room for that if indeed we were able to get more classrooms, more preschool. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Arnett Kovacs, for going forward with this.
Mrs. Strauss.
I am very interested in hearing more about the possibility of the pre-K, particularly for what we can do to continue to support the programs that are in our own schools, because those tend to be the highest quality, and it becomes a seamless experience for families and children. And one of the things, as we have worked with Head Start and expanding those programs over time, part of the benefit is the fact that the children come to school at a young age, stay in that school, their parents become parts of that school community. So you get very high quality program and a continuity, which is important for the children and the families. The county, through their Office for Children, they are the ones that do help to train and license home daycare providers. And from time to time, they have expanded that program as they have gotten grants. And this is very important, and part of their thinking is trying to leverage scarce dollars to help make sure where you have home daycare providers and other people who are offering care to children in other than traditional classroom settings, that they are trained and are offering the best quality piece. I don't believe, I know the schools, we do not have a program where we offer scholarships in daycare centers or private daycare centers. And if that would have to be a discussion for another day. I don't believe by law we can provide that kind of assistance or help or subsidy to another organization that is not ours. Clearly, that would be a conversation for another day, but I will be interested to hear more about what you are proposing.
I just want to thank you for bringing that up, because as you know, I have been an advocate for affordable childcare for many years, and the program that the county does have to train their in-home providers is absolutely amazing. And the in-home providers, the quality programs that they provide to their children is evident by, when their program, what their list of programs are for when it comes out in the fall and the spring, it fills up within hours, because these people are truly dedicated professionals, child care providers, and the county has done a great job with that, and thank you for pointing that out.
And just to add, many of these home daycare providers will take infants,
right,
which is in high demand in the county, particularly with very needy families. So yes.
Mrs. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Arnett Kovacs, for bringing this forward and for continuing to push on the pre-K initiative. I think we all agree that it's vitally important, and it seems like we've been struggling with how to address that waiting list. And so if we have to keep chipping away, I guess that's how we have to do it. But I have a question and a comment. One, do we know if our surrounding jurisdictions also provide pre-K? Yeah?
Well, yeah.
They do?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, they do.
that's good. And then the other thing is, I think that we should get credit and kind of make sure that we change our mission a little bit. Now we're pre-K to 12 and beyond, really. I mean, so I think sometimes people don't realize what we're doing, the extent to which we are benefiting our communities. And so it's just really more of a comment to say that we do try And pre-K is a great example of how we have to all work together. I mean, we all have a role to play, us, the county, the nonprofits, the churches, everybody. But I'm hoping that we can continue to put an emphasis on this because, as you rightly point out, we've got to get it right from the beginning or we'll be paying for it all the way through, and we owe it to these kids to give everybody the best start possible. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and I do think, with that, and since this is a budget talk, we do have to pull out that figure again. For every dollar you put into pre-K, you save $7 to $15 later on down the line. President Obama has used that when he talks about his universal pre-K program. And, those are costs to us for remediation, sometimes incarceration, the county. So there's costs later on down the road, and I just am so hopeful that we will continue, even though we know these facts, we seem to never be able to fund it. So Ms. Schultz uses the phrase often, how do you, eat an elephant one bite at a time? So this is our bite for pre-K this time.
Okay, I get the impression, Ms. Dernak-Koufax, that you've raised all the issues you wish to raise. Ms. McLaughlin, can I turn it to you? Very good.
I guess the first question I have, just following up on the pre-K, because it is something that I was looking at for a funding source. It was noted that other jurisdictions provide pre-K instruction, and I'd like to know a little bit more specifically what that is, because as we're trying to help lead and inform the public, I think the more we can speak to the facts about that. In other words, does Montgomery County, Arlington, Prince William, Loudoun offer pre-K to 100% of eligible students, only 25% of their, we can't make a statement about how pre-K is offered around surrounding jurisdictions and lobby for Fairfax County community to understand not only the importance of it, but the fact that we're one of the wealthiest counties in the country and we're lagging behind. But I think it's really important that we be able to speak to what actually is being offered at these other surrounding jurisdictions, because then that allows us to, I think, be more effective in our own lobbying effort.
If I might, I'd like to ask, I do think that would be an interesting question for us together, and certainly as we look to a long-range strategy to serving every qualifying student, if not more. Is that information that you've just requested necessary for the budget discussion?
No, I do not mean to cause anybody into a, oh my God, what did she just ask now? No, I just meant that I think it's important for all of us when we have this discussion, and we are having a public discussion, that we have to be really mindful that when we say things, so then it kind of puts it into, well, what's wrong with Fairfax County if everybody else is doing it? But everybody beware, when you say that, be more clear about, I'm just saying for my colleagues, I think it's important, not for you, Dr. Garza.
I'm just managing expectations.
Yeah,
so thank you.
In other words, I think for the short term, based on what everybody is saying here tonight, we will not solve the pre-K wait list of 900 plus kids tonight, and we won't solve it next Thursday. What I really had hoped, though, by next Thursday is if there is something meaningful we can do, that it's beyond words, it's beyond our speaking in support of pre-K, but what can we actually do that's reasonable and possible for September 2014? And that's why, my budget question is, we stated earlier in the year that we might look at increasing the class size in our pre-K classes to the maximum allowed, and then that would help open up more seats, or certainly make us more efficient in the cost, but obviously it's you can bring in more kids. Is that being done in September? Are we increasing the class size to maximum allowed, and how many children would that then? Because that's a way to also say the Board of Supervisors, we looked at ways to.
Actually, I had a conversation about this with Mara myself, but I want to make sure I'm not, I'm stating correct information, but it's my understanding that yes, we are looking at that, because there's no cost associated with increasing class size. We can serve exponentially more students. But is that correct, Dr. Presidio?
Excuse me, it is correct. We're in the process of costing that out and providing the additional enrollment figures that we can provide to you in a written response. There's, obviously some guidelines that we have to follow based on the number of students. 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in the program have different cap sizes. We're very close to the caps right now. So that's why we need to be a little bit more precise in calculating the additional students that we can put in there. But we can get you a pretty precise figure, I think, tomorrow.
I just think my advocacy is simply that if it's not already set to happen in our budget, because I did see it listed, in our initial sort of menu of things, and so I thought there was some figure that it might have been even like $400,000 that we would garner in terms of benefit. That would then obviously allow us to bring in more students. In other words, because you're opening up more seats by, having more children served by a single instructor. You can say there's cost savings, but really what we're trying to do is, instead of de-staffing a preschool, we'd actually be hopefully opening up maybe another classroom as a result of doing that. But those are the numbers that it was introduced, and I'd like to make sure by next Thursday that the board maybe helps give direction to Dr. Garza that we would like to ensure that for fall, 2014 or FY 2015 year, that we do that maximum and enable as many seats as possible. And then finally, in terms of just the going to how could we increase more children in pre-K. So what I think I heard Mr. Plattenberg saying is that right now, even if Ms. Dearnett-Kovacs and the 11 of us all wanted to add 4 pre-K classes in September, what I thought I heard you saying is we may have a facilities and location challenge, so that well-intentioned as it may be, it may actually be only 2 classes is what we can find in September. Or if we as a board decided next Thursday we're going to take $300,000 and we're going to open up 2 more classes instead of 1, like Ms. Dearnett-Kovacs said, would you be able to find us a class in September?
It would be challenging, but absolutely anything we can do to serve the needs of the students, we'll do. But I'll tell you, that's why we try starting earlier in the year. Anything that happens around June, May, which is where we are, makes it really challenging.
Right.
The last time we did that, I was scrambling to find space, which was last year. I think we added, I don't know if it was 6 or 8. So in that respect, I felt that we came up with a very creative idea. But it was really challenging because the space does require bathroom facilities.
Okay, so one thing then perhaps we could do, Chairman Belkoff, Budget Chairman, is I noticed on the proposed budget for next week, there's going to be a follow-on motion that we're asking the 2 boards to come to, to create a task force to talk about strategic budgeting. But one of the things that I wanted to find out is, could I propose another follow-on motion that would ask the board to propose a pre-K task force? Because what I keep finding is that as we every year we say we are dedicated to this, that we know the research and best practices says that pre-K education is instrumental to closing the achievement gap and helping students be successful. But if we don't make a concerted effort on a specific issue, we get overwhelmed with all the other things. So is that possible based on the other follow-on motion?
So I will, perhaps this will be bounced to the school board chairman, but my reaction is that that can be brought up through the forum process, which is how the other follow-on motion came forward. Ms. Dearnett-Kovacs.
I think I have some answers for Megan. I believe in VPI, 17 or 18 is the maximum class size, if I'm recalling these facts. And then as far as a joint task force, there already is continual and has been for years joint conversation between staff at the Office for Children and staff in Dr. Dockery's area. So they continually meet and they continually work on things. And for all practical purposes, you know, there has been a very loose, if not formal, you know, between Ms. Hines and I, working with them and hearing where they are. I meet with, you know, the person on the Office for Children. But I do think there could be some merit to that, but I think rather than a follow-up motion on the budget, I think that would probably and should probably come through when we talk about strategic planning and how this needs to be part of our overall initiative, because it's a very similar thing. I sense your frustration, and I've been involved in it perhaps even longer than you, sitting on that other board. It's a constant battle, and we are working with it, and also working, you know, I think we need to involve the larger business community when we talk about this, because there is a group out there called Fairfax Futures, which works with the business community, and they are always looking for funding for pre-K initiatives, and some years they have been successful and some years they have not. So, you know, perhaps with the economy in the upward swing, now we can do something like that.
Okay, and
Mr.
then,
Moon?
I can pass for the time being.
Ms. McLaughlin?
oh, I motioned to Chairman Moon that I'm perfectly comfortable with the guidance to bring it to forum and make it there. So in terms of amendments that I was really hoping to hear from my colleagues on, we're looking at the STEP. And that's been a conversation that some of us have been having. And so I guess I really wanted to sort of open up based on the very helpful chart that Ms. Quinn and Ms. Michael displayed for us at the beginning of tonight's conversation. I would be very curious to hear from my colleagues with that menu of options where you might be considering interest in moving the STEP for all employees up by 1 month. So it would go from November to October, or trying to find money to move it back to September, as opposed to the other menu shows that you could do teacher scale and IAs, but then it doesn't include our US scale employees. And before I draft an amendment, which the reason I don't have anything written right now is staff was pulling all of this together, but it would be very helpful as I'm trying to decide which way to go to know whether people are considering any of that at all and where their preferences are, because that would be that would help me be more strategic in an amendment.
So that's an invitation for all of us to speak up and provide some feedback to Ms. McLaughlin about the potential that an amendment of that sort would have. So I see Mrs. Strauss.
I would just like to share, I have grave concern about bringing back the AP and IB test fees, even though years ago students paid their own fees. I think we're in a different time and a different place, and I think if we brought the fees back, and the students have spoken to us, it was interesting, Will, that was one of the issues that's come back from the student advisory councils, that I think that if we brought the fees back, I think it would be a dampening effect on many students and many families, even if there's some forgiveness for families on free and reduced rate lunch. We know that at the high school level, many families are reluctant to acknowledge income. And we have many families who may be just above those income levels, many lower middle class families, that this would be a burden. And I think we would be taking the high school diploma in the wrong direction. So I have grave concern about bringing those fees back. I know some people have said, oh, everybody can afford it, it's not a problem, and it would have no impact on student achievement or high school diplomas or students' ability to go on to college. But I am not convinced that it would not have a negative downward impact on student achievement. So
So,
that is a concern.
so Mrs. Strauss, since Ms. McLaughlin's question was about altering the timing of the step, and given that your response had to do with the IB fees,
I don't know where the
I
money
think
would-
what my takeaway is that you would not be in favor of using the
That's right.
IB fees as a way of funding that.
Yes, that's,
Okay.
so I don't have any solution as to where the money would come from. I believe that in terms of continued position cuts, I think we're looking at probably 175 additional positions, and I'm not prepared to suggest where those position cuts would come from. So it's continuing to listen and see what ideas people have. But my problem is not that I wouldn't love to be able to continue to increase salaries. Our employees are overworked and underpaid, absolutely. But I don't have any great solution at this point for how we can make greater movement without creating greater harm. So that's my dilemma.
Thank you. I have Mr. Stork next, to be followed by Ms. Evans.
I just have a clarifying question. My understanding is that we're not talking about, well, we would be talking about adding them back into the budget, not taking them out, because they're not in the budget right now. So.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, I
Yes,
wanted to
I'm
be sure
corrected, but using the money to reintroduce the fees and then use the money to fund a step.
I understand.
Got it.
I wanted
Never
to be
mind.
sure that I was, that.
We understand each other.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Evans.
Yes, I just wanted to ask for clarification from Ms. McLaughlin about what she's considering, because when I look at this chart, I had read the bottom chart as just breaking down the top chart. Is that not what the bottom chart is doing? Yes. It is? Okay, so which, what are you asking us to, I see up top, let's just look at the $4 million. And are you suggesting that another consideration would be to divide it up differently based on what's below, or no?
What I'm saying is it's a great menu. So you could do everyone by 1 month at $4 million, everyone by 2 months at $8 million. Or you could go down to the very bottom where it's showing teacher scale and IA scale by, picking and choosing off that menu then.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
So
that answers my
Yeah.
question then. So now I'm understanding where you're going. So thank you.
No, but what I wanted to know from you is where would your preference lie? Do you see any of those options? Do you have a preference for any of those options? Because I'm trying to figure out which amendments might be most appealing to the board.
Right, and before pondering that, the obvious question is where the revenue would come from for it. So, and that would be something that I would want to weigh.
Okay. In the end, obviously, I would have to tell you how to fund it. What I want to know is, without thinking about the funding, because you're not committing to it anyway, I'm just wanting to know, do you have a preference to include all of our employees, or are you willing to focus on the... It's really rather simple. It's saying, you know what, I'm not comfortable only giving a partial raise to part of our employees, so it's either find money for everybody or I wouldn't support it. That's...
Mr. Stork had something he wanted to add to this discussion.
Well, I realized after I had spoken, I wasn't sure that I understood, or I want to make sure we had perfect clarity. In the advertised budget that we passed, the APIB fees were not going to be paid by the school system. So in any action that we take on this budget, we have to essentially add those fees back in to be paid. I just want to, so as in the past, we will be, no, she can't put it back in. The board did not, only the board can put them back in. We approved the budget already. It said advertised budget, here's what it is. If we want to add those fees, the board has to approve to put them back in. In other words, you can't just because I want something in doesn't mean I get it in unless the board votes in favor of that. That is what we did last year. I know there was some disagreement about that among some board members, but let me be clear. The board decides the budget, and not us individually, but us as a collective. And the process that we used last year, which I support, was that the budget chair and vice chair go around to the board members and they identify those items that the superintendent is recommending be put back in, or others are recommending be put back in. And if there's a clear consensus to put those back in, then those would be part of the original, those would be part of the motion that the budget chair, vice chair would make as part of our beginning consideration of the budget. But nothing gets in just because the superintendent thinks it should be in. That has to be part of the amendment to the advertised budget. We start with the advertised budget, and then we amend the advertised budget. Mr. Moon, I don't know how we can do it any other way. We're not a board then. We're just...
No, we will do.
Okay, hold on. I have Ms. Smith next, and then Mr. Moon.
So I guess I'm a board member that has a difference of opinion, and I think it made the budget last year much more difficult to deal with. Historically, what we've done, because the numbers do change from proposed to advertised budget, our assumptions changed with our enrollment and all those other pieces, we create a much more difficult budget process by saying that we go back to this thing that doesn't exist anymore, that's the advertised budget. And it made the budget last year much more complicated. So, you know, I think that it's a cleaner budget. You know, there might be some things in there that the superintendent recommends that are going to be different, but there's not that much of them here. We've had a discussion. I just think it creates more of a problem to go back to the advertised because so many assumptions changed, and that we move forward from the superintendent's recommended budget, which is what I thought we were doing because I've looked at what the agenda item is. It just, we're creating havoc where we don't need to get to this budget.
Okay, next Mr. Moon, to be followed by Ms. Schultz.
Mr. Velkop and I had discussion about this because obviously as a budget committee chair, Mr. Velkop will make a motion, budget motion, and that I did ask Mr. Velkop to go back and check what we did last year and just follow what he did last year. But when you said advertised budget is the main motion, it's not going to be the main motion because the main motion, because we do not have the revenue as put in the advertised budget. If you just make the advertised budget as a main motion, that's going to be out of order. So he's going to have to, Mr. Budget Chair, working with the Vice Chair in consultation with all board members, will have to come up with a motion that's going to adjust the advertised budget. And that's exactly what he did last year. And as the chair, is going to be ruling that way. That's the way to be done on Thursday night. And I think that's what Mr. Sloat basically was indicating. And I don't think there was much disagreement from Mrs. Smith, hopefully. Oh, right.
Mrs. Schultz, your turn.
We will do what we did last year.
So I don't mean to put on my secret decoder ring, but I know for sure there's big disagreement with my colleague. I'll let her speak for herself, but I believe that the truth lies somewhere between what the chairman has just articulated and what Mr. Stork, my good colleague from Mount Vernon, has articulated. And we did have this discussion with all due deference to the superintendent. She cannot propose a budget at this point that subsumes our voted upon and advertised budget. You can't just say, well, this is your new starting point. The starting point is the starting point, and there's only one budget right now that has been voted and adopted by this board, and it is the advertised budget. So while it may be more convenient to just say, well, we'll just stick that aside and start over, unfortunately, that we had this discussion, and I think it is not a good use of this board's time to revisit a discussion that we had resolved. So I think that Mr. Moon got a good start on the handle of it, and I think that it is very easy to just be productive as a board and lead from the place that we arrived at last year and move forward.
So hearing that, Mrs. Reed and I have conferred, and the instruction that we're hearing is that we will be in touch with all of you, and we will do our best to ascertain that anything that shows up in the main motion next week, in our judgment from talking with you, that there are 7 votes for that. So if there are only 6, we will not include it. All right? Mrs. Smith.
I'm more than a little frustrated because you need to have the motion be a balanced budget. And I would tell you that just because we did it last year didn't mean it was an efficient, effective process. And I think you need to look at the parts of it and see how it's going to work out. I just don't see how it really works because the revenue assumptions and everything else are different.
I have Ms. McLaughlin next, and then Mr. Moon.
I have to say, I'm becoming more and more confused as to what we're actually about to do here. The bottom line is this board of 12 voted on an advertised budget and sent it over to the board of supervisors. And now that it's come back based on the transfer and we've had some adjustments, I get all of that, financial adjustments. But in terms of how this board is going to determine how we spend our money, and I'm a huge supporter of the 1.8 million that our superintendent is recommending for in-school suspension. But just like the in-school suspension is a new consideration for us to add on to the budget that we had first voted on, so is the issue of AP and IB test fees. And I got to tell you, what I'm hearing with calling up and seeing if there's 7 votes, that's not doing the work in front of the public. The bottom line is it can't be certain things got talked about behind the scenes one-on-one, and then the rest we have to bring to amendments next week. I think that the proposal from the superintendent is one to consider, but adding it back into the budget should be just as much a discussion as any other amendment to add in or take out. So I will have huge problems if it becomes what's recommended or suggested by the superintendent can go in and become the main motion, but anything else that the very board members who are making governance decisions want to make, then we have to debate it in public and see where it goes. We should be doing that for anything that's changed since our February budget. I understand that Ms. Smith thinks it might be messy or protracted, but I think it's about process and honoring the process. The 12 of us came up with a budget, and now anything we want to do to change it, we got to do out in front of the public and vote on it. And to me, these are both amendments. They're not to be absorbed and become new.
Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Moon, you're next.
I think I'm repeating myself. We'll do exactly the same way we did last year, as long as I have the gavel on the next Thursday. And if the budget motion from Mr. Velkop comes in unbalanced, then that's going to be out of order. So, Mr. Velkop, it will be incumbent upon you to make a motion which is balanced and follow what we did last year. I can be overruled, but there will be what I will be doing.
That's a little bit more difficult guideline, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Just follow what we did last year.
And by the way, hearing the discussion about doing things in public, if anyone here wants to make a motion right now to bring up the superintendent's recommendation and go through those items one by one in public and see if they've got 7 votes, I would certainly entertain that motion. Ms. McLaughlin.
I make that motion.
Is there a second?
Ms.
Evans. You don't have to agree to it.
I mean, what's the
so
motion?
It has been moved that
that we go ahead
It
and
has been moved that we bring up the superintendent's recommended budget, and there are changes in the superintendent's budget from the advertised. And and so that we would go through and.
Mr. Velkov,
Yes.
Mr. Velkov, this is a budget work session. We don't have any motion suddenly coming to the work session without prior public notice. That's going to be all violation of FOIA.
I appreciate your feedback. I think I flew off the handle.
Thank you.
So, Ms. McLaughlin, could you forget that I even said what I said? And let's move on.
well, but if we are, I understand what Mr. Moon is saying, but it's not that we're taking a formal vote on our budget. I'm making a motion that we, as a board, have a public discussion about, as I understand it, 2 recommended changes that have come from the superintendent, and have the discussion in public rather than one-on-one behind the scenes.
Ms. Evans.
I was just going to say, we don't have to be voting on these things. The fact of the matter is, each of us, this is a good opportunity for us to discuss the major changes that the superintendent is recommending to us. We don't need to be taking votes on it, but I think it's worth a discussion, and I appreciate you raising that because this is a good time to do that. I'll start if you'd like. I'd just say, with the, well, but we don't need to have a vote on a discussion. What I'm saying is we can discuss these items and each have an opportunity to express our views on this and get that out in the open. That doesn't mean that we have to say, raise our hands for it. So, on the support on suspension, the 1.8 million, I believe it is. Do I have the right figure on that? Or it's 1.9. 1.9 million for the support and suspension. I'll just start the conversation by saying I strongly support this. I think this is something that we absolutely need at our schools. It's a step forward in getting support on discipline, and so I, for one, am very supportive for it, and I'm happy to discuss the other changes as well, but I'll start with that.
Point of
Mrs.
order.
Smith.
Point of order. We started the evening trying to find out where people's amendments were. So are we going to finish that process first, or are we going to start talking about the other things in the budget? It just kind of helps me with my thinking.
Yes, I think you're making a good point. So how about if we let cooler heads prevail, and after we've gone through all the amendments, we can come back to this nasty question. So Ms. McLaughlin, other amendment ideas?
The sad part was I only got through 2 board members on the issue of the step increase changes, and then we got sidetracked on the APIB test fees. So, yes, the APIB test fees are one of the ways that I would consider finding funds for a step increase, but with a $2.5 billion budget, there are other considerations as well. What I need to understand is, do my colleagues feel that that is a worthy effort on my part to draft an amendment, or are you comfortable keeping the step as recommended currently by the superintendent and leaving it at that? Because I need to get a temperature of where people are.
Mrs. Reed.
I appreciate what you're trying to do, Ms. McLaughlin, but I think, at least for me, in the absence of having a sense for where that funding is coming from, I have to believe that the superintendent did her best job to find what resources she could. So, sure, I think we'd all love to give raises sooner as opposed to later. We'd love to give more money, but the fact is, as I said earlier, I think this is a solid budget. And so I don't think it's fair to ask any of us, frankly, do we support giving a raise sooner? Because in the absence of where would we get that money, I don't feel it's a fair question. So unless you're prepared to talk about that piece of it, I think we should just move on, because I don't know if anybody can react to that.
Ms. McLaughlin.
Sure. I mean, this is a very interesting dynamic because, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, waiting to get the information about costs. It's hard to put forward, where you're going to draw funds if you're not sure how much money it's going to cost to be able to do it. So, but I have said repeatedly that I do believe, looking at Montgomery County as a perfect example of where their families pay for their own AP and IB fees, given that we're one of the wealthiest jurisdictions in the United States, given that 90% of the students who take the AP fees are not free and reduced lunch, and that 82% of those who take the IB exams are not free and reduced lunch, the families' ability to pay in this county are very real. So I do believe that $4 million will certainly move the needle to be able to, at minimum, give a step for 1 month for all of our employees. So that's where I'm going with that. I do believe that there's other areas in the budget that I continue to talk about, including we have 22 instructional coaches that are at the central office level, not within our schools. And that's additional funding that, again, we have a staffing reserve. Those teachers can go back into the classrooms where we need them, so people wouldn't be losing their jobs. But that is a way to look at how things move in the budget. And that was the other thing that I wanted to ask, but not to confuse anybody. Making it clear, if I, based on description, if Montgomery County being able to do it, so why can't Fairfax County be able to do this? Would people recognize that given our employees, as we tell them, are the most important asset we have in this county, are you willing to put $4 million toward this step increase or not?
Mrs. Smith, you're next.
Thank you so much. I don't think you can compare us to Montgomery County because I don't know if they've had the same situation we've had with the Attorney General saying that we can't charge the fees. We can't force people to take the test and pay the fee. And so as I think of my core values in decision making, this has changed over time because of what the Attorney General did. Because before his decision, I totally believed that we should charge for the fees. But my core belief above that is that I believe that we should require every student that takes the AP or the IB class to take the test. So that's my real core belief. I think that the superintendent has talked about the reasons that it's important for kids to take those tests. She talked to us about that at the work session. I believe that there is a rigor to that process for kids that might not think they can do. So I think educationally there's a lot of good reasons to demand the test of the kids. Now that the Attorney General removed our ability to have the core thing take the test, I think we have to pay for the fee. I would prefer not to, but when I go back to my core desire of every kid in that class should take the test, then I think we need to pay for it. So I just don't support going there.
Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, do you have other ideas to bring forward?
Well, is the absence of the other 8 school board members not saying anything mean that they don't support trading AP tests for the IB? And I would like to correct something for what Ms. Smith said. The Attorney General's ruling, she's correct, it might be about individual core value of board members, but in terms of the dilemma it presents this county, again, Montgomery County doesn't force their kids to take the test in order to take the class, get the weights that are deserved based on taking a more rigorous class. So the simple solution is what Fairfax County does, what every other county does that doesn't pay for the test. It's the weight is tied to taking the course, not to taking the test. And I think that we advertised that we might not be paying for these tests, so it's not a surprise to the community if we did it, but it's a simple fix, and the Attorney General's decision does not tie our hands at all.
Ms. Derenak-Kofax.
I think sometimes, again, I think when we look at Fairfax as an aggregate, it's very easy to say we are the 4th wealthiest county in the country. We know that to be true. But in various parts, as you all know, there are a lot of children who are middle class or lower middle class on the economic scale that are not receiving free and reduced lunches. But every decision that they make oftentimes is, as a family unit, a few $100s here or a few $100s there are significant to them. So, and I happen to have many schools where such children are getting their education. So when I have heard in the past is that would I, if it's a choice between having to pay for this, and particularly, well, I'll say an IB school perhaps where you're not even sure if you'll get the credit till after you start college, or do I not play a team sport? Do I not do something like that? And unfortunately, there are more of those families out there than our overall aggregate data shows. So because of those children, and because academics is first and foremost what we are about, and some of these children who would not otherwise even consider taking that test because they wouldn't want to burden their families for whatever reason, or they would have to give up an extracurricular that they love. Those are my reasons. Those are real reasons that I see in my part of the county, and that's why I would not want to do that. I would not want to substitute the cost for us paying for those fees for 1 month earlier when, you know, we all want our teachers to be compensated. That is one of the most important. The students and the teachers, that's the core of who we are. You know, everything else is just icing on the cake. But with 97% of our teachers getting that opportunity to have that step increase 1 month later, I would prefer to keep the fees, us paying for them, as opposed to doing that. So that's my advocacy.
Just as a correction, it would be entire employees.
Yes.
The 4
yeah,
million, not
I
just teachers,
understand,
it's everybody.
But I was speaking specifically about, you know, the core, and I do know that it would be all the employees. I understand that, but a majority of our employees are the teachers.
Ms. Evans.
Well, now that we're talking about the AP and IB fees, I've said this before, so I'll be brief, but I can't support reinstating the AP and IB fees. And I will say I have a greater concern about the IB fees because they are higher. They're $108 a piece as opposed to $89 for AP. And our full IB students are required to take 7 tests, and that's a significant burden on a number of families. And like some of my colleagues before me, I worry very much about the folks who are just above the line, and we have quite a few families like that. And I would be very concerned about how this would discourage some students from being full IB. They might end up taking 1 IB course rather than full IB, or a couple of IB classes. And so I'm very concerned about the discouraging aspect of these fees, and particularly the discrepancy between the IB fees and the AP fees. So I can't support that.
Mrs. Reed.
I have 2 things to say. One, I was just reflecting, and often when we put something out on the table, we get a lot of feedback from the community, but I'm interested to know how much my colleagues have heard. I have heard 0 regarding this issue from anybody in the community, absolutely nothing. So either that means that the people who would be impacted aren't paying attention, or it's not a big deal, and I don't know what, but I'm just curious. Has anybody heard a huge backlash on this issue?
Well, I'd just say, you know, Will Ash told us that the students cared about that.
Right. Okay. Well, okay. And then my second...
And also the principals have weighed in. And also because there has been a recommendation for us not to reinstate the fees, and that recommendation was made quite a while ago from the superintendent, I think the community that we would hear from, at least it appears to the community that reinstating those fees seems to be off the table right now.
And so my second point would just be to ask Dr. Garza if she would, for us, kind of summarize the efforts, because I know that we've gone back and forth several times on this issue, and asking you to check again and work with staff again, and is there anything that could be done? So could you summarize for us just how much you and the staff have tried to figure this particular issue out?
We've looked at well, first of all, I have said consistently look, you can look back at every budget workshop we've had. I was concerned about these fees not being paid for our students. It is considered a best practice, and Montgomery County might not do it, but I think we're better than Montgomery County in lots and lots and lots of ways. But there right now, we've tried to figure out a way to make it cheaper, maybe to only require a couple. All of those things create additional complexities. It is our only way to measure the effectiveness of these programs. I will tell you that likely if we don't pay those fees, we'll have a drop in about half of the students will no longer take the test. And I think that's a pretty good estimate. It may be a little higher than that, but it'll be a sizable drop off. In addition to that, our teachers use these as a semester exam or end of course exam. So then they would have to create something for the students that did not take the exam. And so as principals have made it abundantly clear, they are concerned about us not paying the fees. We have for many, many years. I think it was 1 year considered not to do it, and it was reinstated at the last minute in recent past, I believe. So I tried to figure out when was the last time we charged students for the fees, and it was back in 90-something, in the way back. And so we've tried every which way to figure that out. We have about 20,000 students on an annual basis that benefit from this, and they take almost 40,000 exams. Am I in the range? I don't have it right at my fingertips. But yes, we've tried, and we still feel like it's the best thing for our school system if we put our students first. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, do you have any other ideas to bring forward here?
I will just add that once again, I think when we try to make important decisions like this, especially if we're trying to understand impact, it would be very interesting to find out from Montgomery County what percentage of the students who take the class don't take their tests. Because, we don't know what the drop-off will be in terms of who takes it and who doesn't take it. What I will share is that I am concerned that this is a $4 million way to track how our students are doing in their classes versus the letter grades they earn. And it's a nice to know, but it's not mission critical when we're talking about compensation that's been delayed for our employees for several years. So I think I'm still just struggling in the commitment of that we need to be paying for these fees. I don't understand unless we've looked at how this has occurred and that people don't take the test. And I will also say, as someone who lobbied to get our honors courses weighted, and one of the pushbacks we had back in 2009 to not weight honors courses was we didn't have an external measure, like an AP or an IB test to measure that. And the pushback became there are honors courses throughout the United States. There simply isn't an external measure. Does that mean then that we don't know if we're delivering good curriculum? I happen to believe we're a great school system and we deliver good curriculum. And so in a perfect world, it would be nice to be able to pay for these test fees. But the nice to have versus what's mission critical, I think that's maybe where you've seen me speak so much about why I'm struggling with this coming back into the budget. And I will continue to speak to it that it's not that I wouldn't like to do it, but we've got some choices here. And Dr. Garza, I just want you to know I very much appreciate your guidance and your thinking on it. I hope that as we have this dialogue, we also help you to maybe consider some other things, including, let's understand what the impact it's been on a county like Montgomery that so closely mirrors us and doesn't pay for the fees. What does that do? And that might help us. But I know I've taken up a lot of time, and I apologize, but I think I've covered two things at once, the test fees and the STEP.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Mrs. Strauss to make a comment here, and then I want to move on to Mrs. Schultz.
Very
Mrs.
quickly,
Strauss?
I know some of my colleagues have been concerned that particularly advanced courses, that they make sure that we have good quality across the county. And one of the advantages that we have with the AP and the IB programs, because the end of course exam is really an integral part of the program, we have an opportunity to help us make sure that the quality of those courses is up to snuff in all schools across the county, regardless of the economic challenges, backgrounds, challenges that students come to school with. When Dr. Domenech and this board decided back in the mid-1990s to begin paying for the fees, it was best practice, and it was also acknowledged it is a way to make sure that all students have the opportunity for quality advanced work. And also the fact that these programs are supposed to be geared towards the first year of college. And the experience of a college level course is that there will be a major examination at the end. But it is important that we can ensure quality across all programs, and this does provide us that extra external ability to help us to drive towards quality for all students in those courses. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Schultz, you're next.
There was a great quote earlier by my colleague, Ms. Fairfax, who is in the back, and so I've got one of my own. I do not believe in a fate that will fall on us no matter what we do. I do believe in a fate that will fall on us if we do nothing. That's from one of my favorite president's inauguration speech. I'm not exactly sure what was happening before, a few minutes ago, because frankly, what I'm sensing is a whole lot of dancing by my colleagues, as if everybody is holding their cards tight to their vest and nobody is willing to put the cards on the table and play open hands. And that's what tonight is supposed to be. We have a deadline that's supposed to be midday tomorrow for putting things out. And it's as if we're going to wait for somebody else to falter or put something out there so that somebody else can counter it. And that is not the best work of this board. So I'm going to preface what we're doing with getting very, very specific in terms of what I'm thinking, because I haven't heard a degree of specificity that I was hoping for tonight. And so the question is, and I had a very interesting conversation with, and I want to thank Ms. Quinn and Ms. Michael for their availability and hard work over the last few days. The analogy I used was that the Lego car, and I have 4 boys, so Legos are a great analogy in my house. The Lego car is already built. We're not rebuilding the Lego car at this point. We are not going to change the color of the Lego car. We are not going to add a roof to the Lego car. What we're deciding right now is what color jersey the driver is going to wear, what kind of helmet he's going to wear, and what kind of number is going to go on the car. We're down to brass tacks because we are not moving whole sections of the budget. So then it becomes, what are the priorities of this board that you don't like in our advertised budget? And it was, I had to hold my nose and vote for that budget. I didn't want to do it, but I did it. And so we better go back to the advertised budget. I'll be crystal clear, is that was a Herculean feat to get to a 12-0 on an advertised budget by this board. So that better be our starting point. If you don't like something, or you want to see something done that hasn't been done or has not been adequately addressed, the question is, what is it? And I'll tell you, for me, it's 2 things at this point. One is employee compensation. And the question is, what are our priorities on employee compensation? Are we going to treat all employees the same way? Well, they aren't treated the same way in the superintendent's proposed budget. US scale employees and teacher scale employees are treated differently. And you see it in the table that's been brought forward. So the question is, are you willing to change that? And if so, what are your shifting priorities? And the way I look at it, there are 2 areas. There's an area that is not impacting other employees' salaries or compensation, and impacting employees' compensation as the second one. The other area of concern for me as a compassionate conservative is pre-K. And again, Ms. Koufax pointed out that spending the money up front saves us money later. And we're very good about talking about how much things cost. We aren't so great about talking how much, if we spend money on this, we're going to save money someplace else. And that falls under, in my view, the wise use of taxpayer and stakeholder resources. So those are going to be the two areas where I'm going to be concentrating. And people can say, well, I don't like this and I don't like that. But the brass tacks are, if we're going to change anything, there's got to be a give. If there's a plus, there's a minus, and we've got to balance things out. So as I look at it, I would prioritize, and I have asked for, and we still don't have it, and I understand our colleagues from the county have not been particularly forthcoming, and whatever thumb screws we need to put to them, I would prioritize the kids who are on the pre-K waiting list by 4-year-olds. It's really nice to provide preschool to 3-year-olds. If you can't provide it for the 4-year-olds, there's no point in prioritizing 3-year-olds. So let's find out the list of who the 4-year-olds are. This year, if we don't expand any more than one classroom, those 4-year-olds are in school next year and we're already behind again. And they're already costing us more money. So to me, the maximum number of 4-year-olds that we can get in, and if we can get them in September, great. If we can get them in December, great. If we can get them in February, great. Let's keep working and, we keep chipping away at the edges. Well, let's work at the SAC issue. We've got 245 classrooms times 25 kids is 6,125 seats. Plus, may I remind my colleagues, we have closed elementary schools. So if we want to clear waiting lists, let's do it. Let's be bold. We want to be bold about legislation and national initiatives and everything. Let's start being bold with our own budget. We got 800 and some odd kids on a waiting list. A whole lot of them are 4-year-olds. Figure out where they are, take the money and prioritize and say, you know what, the 4-year-olds, if we don't get them this year, they're going to be in kindergarten the following year, and they're going to be that much further behind. So I'd like to find money to get the maximum number of 4-year-olds into school to save us money down the road, because that's multi-year budgeting, like my colleague, Ms. Reed, had mentioned. The second thing is prioritizing employee compensation. And on this category, we've got the teacher scale, the IA scale, and then you have US scale. And I appreciate and I hear very, very clearly LT and Dr. Garza's concern about sort of swapping pots of money. And on the one hand, I get you don't want to swap pots of money, because if, for example, in some of the choices that were given to us in the table in the fall include, I'll give a for example, not that I'm necessarily advocating it right now, 22 instructional coaches at $1.8 million. A majority of our assistant principals have been moved to 11-month contracts, but there are some that we were attriting over time who are on 12-month contracts to 11-month. But if we just say we're going to pull the Band-Aid off and we're going to move everybody to 11-month contracts, that's another 1.2 million, and so on. There are differences between a teacher scale and a US scale employee in terms of their potential compensation. If you take a typical teacher who has a master's degree, who's a step 5, that's a roughly a $55,000 contract for a 194-day teacher contract. If that person, who right now we basically incentivize to come to a central administration post, because they'll get a 260-day contract and they'll probably be about a US 24, all of a sudden that person's earning over $74,000 a year. So if we don't give US scale employees a raise, yes, that's 7% of the problem, but I'd rather solve 93% of the problem and not be able to fix 100% and not let perfect be the enemy of the good. So you have to make a decision, do you do 2.8 plus 0.3, or do you have to add in another million and go to 4? So if you see an amendment that only has 3 million because it gave up $1 million, yes. Is it establishing priorities? Yes, but that's our role. Our leadership is from this table of making difficult decisions. Those difficult decisions, in my opinion, also include AP and IB fees. And I will tell you that I have come, half circle, 180 degrees on this after spending time talking with teachers who work with seniors. And the more I've spent time talking with the educators in the classroom, the more I see this as a $4 million litmus test on whether or not they're doing their job. That's why we have grading systems. I don't have a $4 million, test anyplace else, a $4 million trigger to find out if teachers are doing their jobs. I have a report card. And, I have a 10th grader who just took an AP comparative government final exam, his final exam on Monday. His final exam he's done for the year because today he took his AP exam. So I'm not exactly sure what my AP comparative government student is going to be doing for the rest of the year because he's finished. He took his final exam and he took his AP exam. Well, did he need to take a final exam on Monday? I don't know, but that's what the teacher did. Do I need to pay $4 million to find out that the teacher did his job on Monday and did his job on Friday? I don't think so. I think it's prudent to have kids have skin in the game and for having realistic conversations with their parents to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to take 4 or 5 AP exams to try to buffer up my college resume for the sake of buffering up my college resume. Maybe we're going to get students that are a little bit less stressed, have fewer health and wellness issues among our students if they have not maxed out their AP and IB curriculum and say, you know what, I'm going to take the things that really interest me and that I'm committing to doing well. Because they can go all the way through that class and they can take that AP test or that IB test and they're getting 1s and 2s and 3s. And I don't know that we've accomplished anything more than the teacher could tell us with a report card. So that's another $4.5 million that's on the table. Are there priorities there? Yes. Am I going to prioritize the ability to do a $4 million litmus test on whether students are being taught by their teachers when I have a report card that will tell me that versus paying employees? That's a scale of justice that I think we're going to have to weigh when the amendments come in. So you are likely to see from me amendments that put AP and IB fees on the table, that take advantage of the additional savings, that take advantage of whatever we can pare back on e-cart, because I think we're going to eventually see, at the behest of our employees, begging us better tools than e-cart currently provides. That's $3.8 million and 8 full-time equivalents. So that's another $3.8 million. Professional scale employees exist all through central administration, particularly in instructional services. If we ask our professional scale employees to do 1, 2, 3, 5 days of subbing, how much can we buy down our subbing costs? Sub costs are enormous to this organization. Now I think with a master schedule change, are they going to improve? Absolutely, because I think that the teachers are going to have better planning time, the more work that we're doing behind the scenes to take care of teacher workload. But looking at innovative things of, hey, you know what? Maybe it's not such a bad idea to take some employees from central administration and put them back in the classroom, subbing a couple times a year. I think that maybe keeps them in touch with their roots, and it's not such a bad idea. On the employee side, we do have the $1.8 million in instructional coaches, the $1.2 million in APs. For preschool, I have asked if we can have a list of where we can max out the preschool programs, because there's some places where there are 14 or 16 kids in the preschool. We get them in fully to 18, then we start whittling away that list. Also, we have special education classrooms where non-CAT kids are in for only a half a day. I'd rather use the other half a day and have kids off the preschool list in for a half a day. It's better than a whole day. And we hear that, and I think we'd get some legitimacy and some respect from our colleagues on the Board of Supervisors if we substantially focus and we're strategic with our list and whittle away that preschool thing, that preschool list. I do think long-term there is a big problem that needs to be solved there. But again, not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. If we don't work substantially, those 4-year-olds are going to age into our school and going to cost us more down the road. So anybody is welcome to comment on any of that, but I am looking at being very specific, very focused, and very prioritized in getting us somewhere slightly different than the difficulty I had with the advertised budget to begin with.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz. I think the notes that I took, and so make sure that if there's anything I forgot, you refresh us here. I heard you want to do something about the APIB fees, eCart, central office subbing, central office instructional coaches, the assistant principals, preschool for 4-year-olds, and classroom space in special ed classrooms.
Well, some of those are pluses and some of those are minuses.
Yes,
so that generally covers, and it doesn't mean that you will see it. It says that's where, as I wait for final numbers, because
right.
I understand the pressure that our financial services team is under, that, as things sift out in the next 12 to 24 to whatever, 72 hours, do not be surprised if you see any of those on the list, because they were on the list, most of them originally, and as things have narrowed and we've put into focus where I think some things need to be better refined and better prioritized on our list, it is spending money on our employees, which we said we were going to do, and being wise with our dollars and our resources for the long-term and multi-year budgeting, and saving ourselves future money by spending wisely now and gaining credibility with our peers on the Board of Supervisors.
I have Ms. Evans next.
Mr. Velkoff, could I clarify just a moment, because I think it's really
Yes, Dr.
important.
Garza.
I may have misunderstood you, Ms. Schultz, but I just want to check. You made a comment with regard to, in my recommended budget, we treat employee groups differently. And I may have misunderstood you.
Just so you understand, what I mean is that we delayed the step to November for the teacher scale and IA, and then the US scale was a 4-month delay from their, it's not exactly even in terms of how it's presented in the budget.
Well, let me explain why. Okay? Because they're actually all treated the same. However, the way the step is done on the other scale employees is on their anniversary date. That's the way it's been in this system for many, many years. So it wasn't because we wanted to treat a certain group differently. That's the way the step is implemented with.
It may have just been the way I articulated it. I just meant that the way it appears in the budget, they're treated differently. It's not that everybody gets it in November. It's that the way we've done it.
I just wanted to be clear. And then the other issue is moving buckets. You talked about moving buckets. What I meant was, I think it would be very difficult to explain, or it would be certainly difficult for morale if we take money from some of our employees and shift it to some other employees. And that's what essentially happens if you change contract length. You're actually taking money away and shifting that. So just wanted to be clear.
I appreciate that, and I do understand that taking a 260-day contract employee to 255 or 254 or 257 or whatever, I do understand that does move money. I mean, that's correct. I did say that moves money effectively from one bucket to another. So yes, that is what I'm saying, is a question of how do we prioritize on difficult decisions. So thank you.
So now Ms. Evans will be followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
Ms. Schultz, thank you.
It's my turn?
Yeah,
I want to say, first of all, thank you for putting this much thought into and consideration into the possibilities for the budget. I have read all the budget questions, but I just don't remember the answer to this. Are there budget questions in there that address any of these amendments that I can go to get background on at this point? I think there's something on APIB fees maybe, but for example, the substitution costs or
substitution was, I think, the one thing that is pending. I don't know if Ms. Quinn has any more information on that.
So, but there is one in that on all of these things, but have any of them been completed on e-card substitution costs?
Yes, we are finalizing the e-card question as we speak, so we've been kind of working on that. And then the substitute cost is pending. We've been trying to run some numbers today, but if you kind of say, we did try to run some examples, and if you say you had 100 professionals that could sub, and because the sub costs are only $100 a day, that would only save $10,000 per day. So if you had 100 professionals subbing 5 days, that would only generate $50,000 in substitute costs, maybe a little bit more when you add the FICA portion of the daily rate.
Maybe enough to get a pre-K IA.
Well, and that does raise another question, because about a year and a half ago, I believe it was, we were told that there was we were taking a look at the cost of substitutes, and have we drawn a conclusion on that, on ways to reduce those costs?
And because the bulk of the substitute costs related to personal and sick leave that the teachers have taken throughout the year, we're trying to find ways to mitigate some of that, and we have not made a lot of progress because, initially we went into it thinking, maybe we're spending a lot on professional development substitute costs, but what it turned out was more than 75% of the sub costs really related to personal and sick leave days the teachers were taking throughout the year. So in order to reduce the sub costs, we really needed to look at our leave policy, our usage, and our patterns and behavior, and that takes, I believe, a little bit longer to evaluate, and we weren't able to make any progress after that we had determined that it was really more the sick and the personal day sub costs that were continuing to increase from year to year.
Okay, I think maybe Dr. Garza had something to say. Is this an ongoing evaluation that we're continuing to look at ways to reduce those costs? As I recall, they were fairly substantial.
Yes, and we've looked at, where we can, maybe there's some innovative ways that we could, encourage folks not to maximize their full extent of their vacation days or sick leave days. And I think there's some ways we could do that. I will tell you that I think it's a novel concept, but I would have you think about, we've continued to cut central office and cut, and we cut again this year. We just are, we're working on the risk assessment and on that survey workload of all of our employees. When we talk about workload, we tend to only think of our teachers. We have workload challenges with all of our employees. Mm-hmm. And so now because of the cuts from this year, 731 positions, and some of those were at central office. Right. Now the work's not changing. I mean, we've got a lot of demands on our folks. And so just kind of have you think about that.
Right. I do think it's worthwhile for us to continue looking at the school level of, what's driving those costs. Because I don't remember the number anymore, but I do remember that they were significant. That there were significant numbers. Is that what it was? That is significant. Thank you. So I'll be interested to see the answers to those budget questions and have some conversations with the folks who are most directly involved. I did want some clarity on one of your proposals. I don't think I understood what you were saying about special education classrooms. Is that, can you clarify what you were looking at?
What I'd asked, and I'd brought Mr. Plattenberg into the loop as well, but one of the things I think Ms. Quinn and Ms. Michael are having difficulty accessing is a clear list, and I think that we've all circled back around with the county on this a number of times of who's on the wait list and where are they and how old are they. And so
in special ed?
And no, in preschool. And then matching that up with, do we have a special ed classroom close by one of the epicenters of need of preschool students, and quite often those non-CAT special ed classes are only held for half a day. Well, there's sometimes where there isn't an afternoon session. Wouldn't we rather utilize, because there you have space.
You're talking
so the
about
question
facilities.
is the access to space. And we say we don't have space, but if you have a half a day of space where Otherwise, there are special ed preschool students. That facility would be prepared to receive preschool students that are not special ed, just on a FCPS or Head Start waiting list. So take advantage and maximize the facility resources that we already have to buy down incrementally the list. And in my opinion, I think we should be prioritizing by 4-year-olds.
And so this is not an amendment having to do with special education. It's a facilities issue that's in connection with preschool, correct? Is that, do I understand
I
you?
don't know until I have the information.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
First, Ms. McLaughlin, and then Mrs. Strauss. Ms. McLaughlin.
I want to thank Ms. Schultz for bringing all of these considerations to the table. I find many of them to be very compelling, and we'll look forward to talking with you further about it, because I'm quite supportive of much of what you presented here so far. Something that's interesting to note, when I was looking at this, and what you said, Ms. Schultz, is that these tests being sort of a $4 million external measure, I certainly hope it is not standard practice that the AP exam is the final exam, because as we know, learning continues for another month beyond. And my own children's experience is that they actually do have final exams. Learning doesn't stop after the AP exam. Their teachers are still giving them homework and tests and quizzes. It goes beyond just learning for that content. But I think it does present an issue for us that if certain teachers think this is a final exam, which they'll never get the score till after the class is over, so I don't even know how it can serve as a final exam, but I think it raises issues about what expectations of learning after the IB and AP tests are done. I also think it's important for my colleagues to just be aware, from looking at the budget, of the 8,000 roughly IB exams that are taken each year. We only yield 390 IB diploma students in the end. 390 out of 8,137 exams. So technically, if each child takes 7 to be a full IB candidate or a graduate, it would be 1,100 students we should be seeing coming out with an IB diploma, but we see 390. So I feel at minimum we've got a lot we should be looking at. And one thought, Ms. Schultz, that I would ask you to consider, if our colleagues are uncomfortable about what we do this year with the AP and IB exams, even though we did advertise that the family's going to pay for it, shift that over to being considered as a year-end expenditure, as one-time funding. Do our research, but in the meantime, we can use the $4 million now for recurring funds, which would be, step increases for our employees. So given that there's some uncertainty about the necessity of still paying $4 million every year, I would offer that that's another option. You don't put it into the budget, and put it over for year-end consideration, and you can pay it for one more year while we do our homework and stop carrying it over as a recurring fund. So I just wanted to make those points for now.
Okay, next I have Mrs. Strauss, then Mrs. Schultz.
Just a quick comment. We do have in the county a number of Head Start combined daycare classes, and we also have a number of special education preschool classes where we also combine other students for daycare purposes, particularly for our special education students who then have the opportunity to be in school and working with normally progressing peers. But that's just a comment. Thanks.
Ms. Schultz.
So just to clarify, yes, Ms. McLaughlin, I'm not sure if I said, because I have so many notes here, yes, I am considering also, the carryover for, any potential funding based on, how my colleagues, seem to be intrigued or reticent about any of these notions. I don't know, I believe it was actually staff who had indicated that potentially teachers are using the AP or IB tests as final exams. I'm not a instructional specialist or assistant superintendent of instructional services, and I don't play one on TV, so I'm not going to proclaim. But I will also make note that that students are taking AP tests this year, and this is going to be one more plug for the fact that, or they're taking them this week, that the reason they're taking them this week is a national norm, and the reason that they're nationally normed and taking them this week and why we should start school when we want is so that we'll have 2 more weeks, 3 more weeks, or 5 more days ahead before the kids take the test.
Okay. Mr. McElveen, have you any ideas to bring forward to the group?
No, please move on.
I know that Mrs. Reed went to get some water, but I think she has a few more items. And perhaps Mr. Stork. I myself have no items to bring forward. So those of you in the back room, somebody's asking a question. Ms. McLaughlin.
Dr. Garza, while we're sitting here waiting, one thought that I had was curious if you might be able to speak to is with our hearings office. We've had a decline in the number of hearings as we've tried to adjust the way we're doing discipline at the lower level. Is there been any impact on how that affects the workload and therefore the staffing in the hearings office?
Last year, we actually reduced by 2 positions, the hearings office, and we'll monitor it this year, assuming changes recommended on the SRNR are adopted. We'll see how that might affect them, but they have been reduced as we've monitored those.
Great, thank you for providing that detail.
Okay, Ms. Reed.
If I stayed back there any longer, Mr. Velkoff might have had to start singing till I got back, fill up a little time. Okay, all right, I have a few more things, and I would put these this time explicitly under the category of parking lot issues that I hope my colleagues can begin to think about now, and I'll just list them briefly. I won't spend a lot of time talking about them. One is office space efficiencies, and I did spend quite a bit of time with Mr. Plattenberg trying to understand, particularly since we're losing staff, doesn't that mean that we need less space? And of course, it's much more complicated than that. But we are continuing to look at that issue. I know he explained at length the various activities that are underway, but so I just really want the public to know that that's something that staff are looking at is to make sure that we're being as efficient as possible with the space that we're using for our staff. So that's all I'll say about that. Several issues have come to me, probably like my colleagues from people in the community, and I wanted to raise those. One, Ms. Schultz talked about the contract length reductions. And again, most people say, well, gee, if school isn't in session 12 months a year, do all of our employees need to be on 12-month contracts? And again, just throwing it out there. I know APs in particular, a principal told me I really don't have to have, the APs 12 months a year. So again, just throwing it out there for future consideration. Also, the adult high school program. I heard a lot about the inefficiencies there for transitional schools. And so that's something that I think we should also look at down the road. I'm not proposing any amendment this year on that, but I did want to make sure that that was on our radar, particularly because that, I believe, again, as we look to our critical mission, that's something that we can at least look at what else is available in the community and make sure we're not duplicating efforts. And last but not least, the school board office. Some of you may recall that I had contemplated an amendment regarding the school board office, and I think that we're going to take one for the team along with all of our other staff as proposed by the superintendent. But I do hope that at year end, if there's some remaining funds, to propose that we use some of that for professional development, to beef up our own capabilities to advocate at the state and federal level. Because what happens now is one of us gets to go to a conference and then, goes back to business as usual. So that's something just I want to put on my colleagues' agenda for later on here for year end. And that's all I had. I don't know if anybody has any comments about any of those issues or if you're just tired of hearing me talk, but I did want to again, get people thinking about some of these bigger picture issues. And I'll just end by saying this is year 5 for me doing the budget, and it seems like every year we come to this point and we've been so busy with so many issues, and all of a sudden we grapple with, pick a handful of issues, and we just don't have the information we need to make an informed decision, whether it's the APIB fees or pick what the issue is. But so that's why I'm really advocating to address some of these issues now, so that come next year, we'll have the information on what surrounding jurisdictions do and what potential impacts might be and what cost savings might be and all those things. But I feel like, we continue to be in this position, and, frankly, I feel that I can't make an informed decision without having that information that I need.
Thank you, Mrs. Reed. I think we have a comment from Ms. McLaughlin and then Ms. Schultz.
Ms. Reed, in thinking about the issue on, even if we looked at for end of year funds and whether or not what we could do with school board office, because we gave up $100,000 toward another position, it would be my advocacy in terms of wants versus needs that $100,000 needs to go toward a budget analyst. I think that Ms. Quinn and Kristen Michael have worked tirelessly to answer budget questions from 12 school board members, 10 boards of supervisors, and I'm sure countless other stakeholders who have written into them. And it's been very difficult. And then we all flooded them with more questions, all at the 11th hour. It is not good practice. And so when I think about the wants versus needs of how we can do better work as a governing body, we have got to get a budget analyst in the school board office. So if you were to bring forward something to say, looking at year end, I just wanted you to know my advocacy would be to get this board to commit to taking work off of the superintendent and her staff and let us do a better job that we were elected to do, which is to govern and set a responsible budget. So, but I do think that you raised very compelling points about our length of contracts for our employees in terms of where we need them. Because ideally, we'd like to employ all of our teachers year-round so that they could have a 12-month salary. But we don't need all of them for 12 months, and so we don't employ them for 12 months. And if there are other positions in the county that we don't need 12 months of services, then I think I again would say it would be helpful with Dr. Garza going forward into FY 2016 that we look at other jurisdictions to just understand, where do we need to have 12-month employees, where do we have 11? And I think that also goes to what Ms. Schultz had said earlier. If we're phasing out 12-month assistant principals because our new ones are now on 11-month contracts, then I guess my question is, why is that a grandfathering? I've watched my husband now, as a general counsel, have to give several people, reduction in force notices over the last month, and it's been very difficult. But it's a reality going on still out there in the workforce, and I think that while painful, we just have to be thinking about the fact that if we have to make decisions on how to keep the most people here to manage the workload, then I think we have to be thinking about our contract lengths as well.
Yes, if you don't mind, Mr. Velkoff, may I? Yeah, we're very, very well aware that how difficult it is to tell people that they no longer have their job. That's happening every day in our division, and it has been for the last couple of months. So it's very difficult, and we know that. So I think we have made some difficult decisions. Ms. Reed, I've had a high school principal tell me the same thing you did. So there has been some talk since then. I think he's the only one and I know who he is. I think he's the only one, because I've heard very clearly from the others that, you know, they've got master schedules going on, they've got lots of things going on in the building. So anyway, I don't think it's a widely shared opinion.
Next is Ms. Schultz, to be followed by Mrs. Strauss, then Mrs. Smith, and Ms. Derenak Kofax. Ms. Schultz.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to ask my colleague, Ms. Reed, for a clarification. Are you at this point articulating amendments that you are thinking about, or that you will be, or you're just highlighting points that you want us to muse upon?
The latter.
So that you're not actually contemplating, you know, anything having to do with any of those budget figures or areas at this point?
That's correct.
And is the reason because you don't feel you have the information at this point to be able to craft an amendment?
In most cases, yes, I would say that that's true.
Okay. So the reason I kind of tried to put the popcorn trail to the final question is, to some degree, I know we as individuals and collectively as a board love data. And we love to know things. And there's a song out there, Let It Go. There is a little bit of having to let it go and craft an amendment that says direct the superintendent. And we might not know exactly how she's going to do it. And if we give it to her and say, we would like you to do this, and understand that we've taken on the responsibility of telling her to do it, but also allow her professionally and operationally to allow her professional staff to get it done, we might not have to enumerate with a great degree of detail that we so love in an amendment. And I think that we've got to be a little bit more comfortable with the language of direct the superintendent. Because if we're just going to take the money and we say, you know what, direct the superintendent to whatever, fill in the blank, you know, put the greatest number of preschool kids into facilities with this amount of money, and we might not know the exact number of kids and we might not know the exact facility, but what we're saying is we're setting things aside. And I'm just using my example, you can fill in your own example. I'm just saying that we might not have all the clarity in the world, and we're going to have to individually and collectively let it go to the person that we've hired to help us run this division.
Okay, next is Mrs. Strauss.
During the recession, and many of you were not yet on the board, one of the early significant budget cuts that we took, because remember, we cut $500 million in 1,452 positions. One of the very first things that we did was we made a significant decrease in contract lengths, which was very painful for a lot of people. There were teachers in various categories who had gone into certain subject areas with the assumption of a certain salary over a number of years, because they had chosen those areas. And when those contract lengths were significantly reduced, those were hard pay increases. So we have looked at that and have continued to reduce contract lengths. And that was a pretty tough thing. So the other pieces we remember, by the time we finish with this budget, we will have reduced our employee base by 2,000 employees, and we will have welcomed 16,000 more children to our school system. This is an unsustainable trend.
Thank you. Next is Mrs. Smith.
I thought the purpose of tonight's meeting was for us to get through the current budget and through the budget amendments. You know, I know we talk about when the budget's done, we start again on the next one. But I do worry as I sit here and I listen to this conversation going on about cutting contract lengths and what we're going to do for next year. and our employees that are probably sitting here watching this wondering, what in the heck is going on, and how am I ever going to get my work done? I think there is a place for these discussions, that I think we all agree. It's obvious that the funding that we feel like we require isn't here. But I think we've gone too far down a field today into other areas that we need to deal with later, and I wish we would just focus on us getting through this budget right now, because I think we're creating more angst than we need to at this point of the budget process.
Okay, next is Ms. Darrenette Kofax, to be followed by Ms. McLaughlin.
I could not agree more with my colleague, Ms. Smith. Some of the things that we're talking about tonight and some of our lack of information is because these are not issues that you bring up a week before. There were, from the moment Dr. Garza started, she started talking about the budget. And if you were passionate about an issue, you needed to be working with staff long ago. I think we have gotten off track. We talk about streamline and focus. We talk about strategic planning. What we are doing here tonight has not been as strategic as I like. While I appreciate lots of passion that's coming up in some of the issues from colleagues that I didn't realize had passion in some of these issues, some of the information or lack thereof is because due diligence has not been done prior to tonight. And for me, since Ms. Schultz and I seem to be bouncing off each other's key phrases, I'm going to say let it go until next year. Start right on time then. But as Ms. Smith says, let's get through this. And all of those things which are being talked about, leading us down different alleys that we had plenty of time to discuss. I'm feeling my own sense of frustration about that.
Okay, next is Ms. McLaughlin, to be followed by Ms. Schultz.
I think that what I actually have heard is quite a few suggested amendments that were based on things that Dr. Garza advertised, that if we did not get the funding we needed from the Board of Supervisors, which is what happened, then additional reductions would need to take place. Everything that I have heard our colleagues tonight discuss and say may need to happen in amendments is what we have been advertising since January. It's not a surprise. It's not school board members not doing their due diligence. As Ms. Schultz pointed out earlier, the message that came to many of us when we voted in early February was, please don't rearrange the deck chairs right now. Let's go in solidarity with the proposed budget from the superintendent. Don't try to, reconsider where budget priorities, wants versus needs, where we spend the money would go. That will be later after we get the transfer April 29th. Well, April 29th came. We had one budget work session discussion before tonight. And that's what tonight was after that, to say, okay, where are we embracing this budget? And I can appreciate that with 12 board members, we come at it differently. Some want to say, you know what, our superintendent leads this operation, so really let's just follow her guidance. I would offer that I agree she gives us her very best work, but the reason the public elected 12, not 9, 12 school board members is to bring 12 best minds to help the superintendent look at this $2.5 massive billion-dollar budget and say, are we honoring what we believe the community that elected us to direct our wants versus needs? And as painful as this might be, this is what it all comes down to in the end. So I actually think things like contract reductions, while uncomfortable, actually are what was advertised. And when were we've never as a board talked about it. And what I've noticed tonight is that I think it's painful for a vast portion of the board because there's very few who actually want to change the proposed budget. And what disappoints me is, in the end, what I'm seeing is we didn't do anything from the moment the superintendent worked this hard to bring something to us in January. What is anybody doing at all in terms of the work that we're supposed to do as board members. If I'm trying to figure out why we're here then. If we want to just abdicate to a proposed budget from January 1, then that's real easy work to do, but I don't think that's what the public expected us to do, and I know our employees expected us to have to do some of this hard work tonight, and I'm sorry it's disappointed people on the board.
Okay. Next is Ms. Schultz.
I sense a great degree of frustration from my colleagues, and I understand that this part, as we're close to the finish line, is frustrating, but this is what we're elected to do. And if we don't spend our time on a $2.5 billion budget and work down to the nitty-gritty on the details of what we have professed our priorities are, yeah, the end is difficult. It doesn't mean it's not worth doing. It doesn't mean it's not worth having a conversation. And there has been virtually nothing put on the table. And if you do want to just adopt the superintendent's proposed budget, that's fine, but that doesn't mean that some of us who believe that we've been listening to our colleagues all along don't now have a stewardship responsibility to discuss the budget, because we were asked and we were told and we were given a very clear message that no amendments would be accepted, considered, or passed at the time that we put together an advertised budget. And so in deference to our colleagues, we allowed that part of the process to be more navigable. Inevitably, if that was going to be more navigable, it is very clear that it was going to happen now. And I said it then, and I've said it since, so it cannot be a surprise that the one and only time that we are talking about the individual components of this budget is going to be a full conversation. And if every single one of you choose not to put up an amendment and I'm the only one, I am not going to abdicate my responsibility of providing zero input in terms of amendments the first time around. And this has nothing to do with not doing homework. Actually, a tremendous amount of homework and a tremendous amount of time and effort have gone into this. And we bypassed, the front end of this budget to allow the superintendent and the board of supervisors to have a more reasonable conversation in the public eye. And now we're at, fourth and goal. And yes, fourth and goal is tough, but this is what we're elected to do. So I'm surprised about the level of consternation that's being expressed about the only time that we're talking about the individual components about the budget.
Okay, Ms. Schultz. Next is Ms. Darrenette Koufax, and then Mr. Stork.
Just some clarity. It's certainly not anybody trying to thwart stewardship or oversight of the budget as we are elected officials. My comments were meant to just basically talk about a different way. I get what you're saying. We went forward and we wanted to ensure that the budget we put forward was one that we supported Dr. Garza on. But we had, my points are being, we had plenty of opportunity to dialogue and to get information from staff, even if you were not going to put forth an amendment. That's what I'm saying. So it's just a different way to look at the workload. I think with what I was hearing and what I was commenting on specifically was you asking colleagues questions, Ms. Schultz asking Ms. Reed specifically a question, do you not feel like you have the information that you need? And I don't know which one of her parking lot issues she was speaking of, but it also sounded like when we were discussing some of the other issues, some people were expressing their own frustration that they didn't have the information I need. And my point was what I was trying to make is even though if you weren't intending to make an amendment, all of that due diligence, if you will, could have been being done throughout the year, because it's nearly impossible to get some of the information within a week's time on some of these multiple amendments and multiple issues that are being brought up for staff.
Thank you. Mr. Stork.
Thank you, Mr. Velkoff. I support and urge all my colleagues to do their duty, frankly, and if you're not satisfied with the budget we've been looking at, to bring amendment and make it better in your eyes at least, and we'll all get to choose or decide whether or not we think it improves it or not. So I think that's our highest responsibility, and I'll take whatever time, spend whatever time it takes to fully consider it, because I think there are opportunities for change. I don't feel compelled at the moment to offer any. I have one I'm considering, but I doubt if I bring it forwards, because I don't have anything that's that compelling. But I am concerned about restoring APIB fees. I'm not sure that's the way to go, but I haven't figured out what the best use of that funds would be otherwise, other than employee wages. I think we clearly committed to that. But is the trade-off appropriate? And that's what I'm struggling with. So I'm making that clear to all of you. It's something I'm open to, but I haven't figured out where I am at on that. But there are some other things I've heard tonight that I'm very interested in, and again, urge you all to get them out there. Please give me a call if you have something. I'm happy to talk with you, and look forward to expressing my views next Thursday when we actually vote on it as to where I stand on those. As the last item I had is about follow-on motions, Mr. Chairman. In previous years, we've had follow-on motions that are related to the budget, and I'm considering a follow-on motion again this year, similar to the one I made last year, concerning compensation for staff. And I wasn't clear on our earlier discussion about follow-on motions if that would be viewed as germane and appropriate to consideration on Thursday night as well.
If you're going to be bringing up the follow-on motion, just like the one you did last year, I am actually looking at last year's agenda item right here. That will be very germane.
Okay, and I will be doing a version of what I did previously. Last year, I made a motion about committing this board to a step increase, because we spent such a great deal of time last year doing that, because we recognized that we weren't going to accomplish what we really wanted to do last year. I'll probably make something similar this year, which again troubles me, because I'm still looking for ways to address what our commitment was last year. And I know we came a long way, but to me, accomplishing the goal was what we set out to do, and we're not there, and that troubles me, and I'm still weighing as to what our options are to try to address that. So thank you.
Okay, I believe Ms. McLaughlin has one more issue to raise. Ms. McLaughlin.
I, again, was trying to look at the wants versus needs, and two things that I have been looking at is our tuition reimbursement. Again, it's something that we really like to be able to do. It's kind of like we really like being able to pay for our test fees for our students, and use that for external measures and things like that. But the question is, with the 1.2 million in tuition reimbursement, which was on our list of considerations that we would have used for budget reductions, the question would be, would that benefit, again, looking at where some of our other needs are within, compensating employees. And so I'm sort of looking over at Dr. Garza and wondering, in your dialogue with stakeholders, the tuition reimbursement funds, what went into your thinking of leaving that within the budget versus taking it?
No, it was actually, it's gone, it was cut.
Okay.
It was cut. I mean, it was a nice to have, and certainly we would love to be in a position to continue to do that, but again, these hard choices we had to make. So it was cut in the original budget.
In the January one.
In the January one,
and
it remains.
I miss seeing it being in there.
And it remains a cut in there.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And then the other question I had was is it called the Project Management Oversight Committee? I think it's about $900,000. Is that also eliminated?
That was project management, and what that was created to support the implementation of the board's established student achievement goals. And for an example, the project, the Global Awareness Technology Project, that was created and designed from this team taking the board's goal and developing an action plan and implementing it. With that said, it was cut by half, I believe, in this budget. So that pot of money was cut by, can you?
Yes, the original funding level in 2014 was $1.8 million, so we did cut it by 50%. So what's in the current budget is the $900,000.
And that's what I was referencing when I said 900,000. So we're still keeping 900,000 in FY 2015.
Yes, because we do anticipate, while we had to make a hard decision to cut it, we do anticipate, as a result of the strategic planning process and the Portrait of a Graduate, we're going to likely need some resource, depending upon what the priorities of this board this summer, to start some of that work. And so that's some planning work, because we're going to have to implement.
But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, does that $900,000 go toward outside salaries? Does it go, I mean, how is that, I mean, I understand what it's, the line item title is, but what actually, where does the 900,000 go? What actually gets, how's it spent?
Okay, I think the perfect example is the design and the implementation of the Global Technology Project. First of all, there had to be a team of teachers and people get together, and you have to pay them for their extra time to develop the project. Then we have to typically have training that goes along with that. So there's cost associated with implementing anything that the board says is a new initiative. You know, there has to be some planning and some design work done. And so we did cut it in half because a lot of that work has been done, but likely we felt like there may be some additional priorities that the board wants to work on this summer and starting next school year. Do you want to add to that, Susan?
Sure, I think you covered it pretty well, but typically what happens is we would identify projects related to our student achievement goals, and as you start the project, as Dr. Garza mentioned, you have initial costs. So one of the other examples was when we were rolling out the student learning plan. We had to have initial costs to roll out the project. And most of the projects related to, as I mentioned, the 3 student achievement goals when we were starting the monitoring reports for those particular goals. So as each fiscal year, there is a project steering committee that identifies which projects and what would the implementation costs would be. And it varies from year to year, and I believe all the project information is posted on our website for all the various different projects within that particular PMOC project.
Thank you, I appreciate the clarity on that one, because that to me would be one that, again, I think trying to have a clearer understanding of where it's mission critical is important.
Mrs. Strauss, I believe you have a comment.
I know that we all feel bad because we wished we could have given better pay raises. We really did. We wanted to be able to give a full step. However, in order to get to where we are, which is not completely where we would have liked to have been, to remind all of us, we have bid off a difficult chunk. We are willing to cut 731 positions. And in all of my many years of working with Fairfax County Public Schools and on the school board, we have never come to a position where we felt the need to give pay increases was so great, which I think it is, where the need was so great that we were willing to increase class size for the 3rd time. Never have we seen ourselves in this position, but we are here. And we promised last year and said to our community, you get to the point where we have to find a way to continue to keep our best teachers and employees, because the quality of the people in our schools determines the quality of instruction for our children. And at some point, you make very difficult decisions in order to try to give the best pay package you can so you can keep your people. And that's where we are. In 2 other downturns that I've been on the board, where we've had to make difficult decisions, we've frozen pay, we've made cuts, but we have never found ourselves in a position where we have to begin actually cutting positions, real positions, in order to pay people. And that's where we are. And I think that this is where we have to be right now. So on the one hand, we are sorry that we can't do more. But we have come a long way, and we are prepared, it appears, to go forward with a very, very difficult decision. And what is interesting is that as a community, we all kind of see where we are. You don't see an entire auditorium saying, no, freeze pay, cut pay to save those positions. The last 2 times I've been through tough times, and they were not as hard as they are now, the auditorium was full, and we backed off of making cuts, particularly cuts in classrooms. Everybody went away and said, okay, we'll freeze pay. We won't give pay increases because we are reluctant to cut positions. And this time, we are going to cut positions in order to pay people, because there is simply a limit to how far you can go and not pay people. And that's where we are. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough decision, but I think we are prepared to do it. And as I said before, we can't continue to cut 2,000 positions with 16,000 more kids. That trend cannot continue. We will not be the same school system that we are. And we're beginning to hear from schools what it means to cut 22 sections in a high school. And it's hard, but we have to pay our people. We cannot take advantage of them anymore. So remember that.
Thank you, Mrs. Strauss. I think I have Ms. McLaughlin for a follow-on point.
I just, in listening to what Ms. Strauss said, with the over 700 positions that we're reducing, which is, I think, hard for everyone in this system. You never want that to happen. But Dr. Garza, I was wondering, because we do have the influx of new students coming in, and we did calculate the cost of those new students coming in based on the staffing that is required when those new students come in. So is the net loss 700 positions, or based on the new students coming in, we'll be hiring X hundred number of employees to cover those new students?
The net loss is around 340-something positions. They'll get the exact number.
We could get you the exact number.
Oh, no, that's all right. I just think,
it's really important to note, because I've talked about this a lot in our community. Those are real cuts. Because if we weren't in a cost-cutting mode, next year, we'd be adding teachers, and guess what? We would still have 731 more people to do the work. So while we're growing, and we have to help people understand that. So it's not, it is an appreciable difference in our schools and in our workplace throughout our system, is we have fewer people to do the work. And so it is although we're growing, and thank goodness we are, but we have that many fewer people to do the work.
Okay, leaving no stone unturned, I'm going to recognize Mrs. Reed so she can ask a question of the superintendent.
I do feel compelled to make a quick comment, and that is that I think that we all agree that the budget is probably one of the most important activities that this board is engaged in, and I feel like we don't get a chance to talk about financial issues nearly enough. So in fact, I think this has been quite a fruitful discussion, and certainly we haven't wasted our time. It also points out, since there aren't a lot of talk about amendments, that there really isn't a lot of low-hanging fruit And it also points to the need that some of us have raised, that we have to make significant changes that require extensive thought and dialogue, that nothing can be done quickly. So I just wanted to share that with you. But I have a question now for the superintendent. And that is that I know that we have been considering as a system rolling out to a full day Monday program, and I don't believe that that decision has been resolved yet. But my question is, will that have any implications for this budget that we're discussing? Do we need to put some kind of a placeholder in there?
Because we are where we are in the budget process, I would advise against setting aside any money for that purpose. I think that because we don't know how much it would cost, and we'd have to take that money from somewhere, and we may not do that anyway. So I think down the road, should the board consider doing that, we would have to consider out of year-end funds in order to be able to do that.
Thank you. That's the last word from me.
Okay, I'm just going to briefly return to the question about the main motion, and I'm just going to remind everyone that in Robert's rules, it is possible to divide the question. That motion does require a second. It's not debatable. It is amendable, and it requires a majority vote. So with that said, I think we're done.
Are we done? I'm sorry. May I make a
Please.
real quick comment? I'm sorry, I feel compelled to do so. I want to be really clear about this because my position on compensation for our employees. I mean, I've spoken, I don't know how many over hundreds of meetings and presentations and different groups, and I believe that I've been a strong champion for our employees and compensating our employees. They deserve more than we were able to give them this time, no doubt. I will tell you that we've had employee groups, all employee groups, the teacher associations, all of them at the table repeatedly throughout the year. And unless that's changed in recent weeks, they all said, let's keep all of our employees together. All of our employees are important. So I just want you all to know, and while I've seen some website and some other information that gave the impression I wasn't strongly advocating for our employees and their compensation, that's absolutely erroneous, and I take strong objection to that. I remain, like this board does, committed to doing everything we can for our employees. Wish we didn't have to delay until November, but we knew if we didn't get the revenue we needed, it was going to be virtually impossible to do the step as we had originally and hopefully had planned. But I think we will keep striving. Our goal is to get to the top, be the most competitive in the area, and I think we'll get there. But we've got to have more time to do that. And the final note I will say is it is affirming to know that we're not the only one in this position. I know at least 5 school systems around us that are delaying their pay raise to their employees till November. And I'm sure they're just like us. They don't want to do that. But we're not unique in that situation. And that included Montgomery County, Loudoun, I believe. There were 5 of them all around us. And I believe that was provided to you all at some point. So again, I'm mindful of our great employees, and they are what makes this place special. And wish we could do more, and we will continue to advocate for our employees. So just wanted to set the record straight, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Garza. Mr. Moon, I understand Mr. Stork wants to raise one more question before I turn it back to you.
I apologize for not thinking of this earlier, but first off, Dr. Garza, thank you very much. And this board knows absolutely how hard you've worked and how the lengths that you've gone to try to get additional compensation, additional funding to support that compensation. So at least this board member greatly appreciates everything you've done. And I have no doubt that if there was any way to do this, you would have found it because you have a board who's equally committed to that. So thank you very much. My question actually has to do with something I don't remember hearing specifically speaking to tonight, which directly impacts our budget. And I just want to get the latest clarification on the state funding, and is there something that we should or shouldn't know when we go to vote on this budget a week from now that needs to be included in that discussion or in that at least in the motion itself that we pass. So I just, if somebody could address that in general, and so we make sure that we cover that particular issue next Thursday.
We're not as reliant upon getting the money immediately. We will be affected negatively if it's not soon, but some other school systems will be very egregiously affected because they're so reliant upon state revenue. But I may not have the most up-to-date information, so I'd like to ask Susan if she's heard anything.
Actually, you do have the most up-to-date information. We have not heard a lot from the state on where we are. So as Dr. Garza mentioned, because we're not so reliant on the state funding, you know, what we have in the budget is a projection. So if we do hear something differently and something different gets passed, we are going to have to make that adjustment at year end.
Then my question then related to that is, do we need special language in our budget motion that if, assuming the state doesn't pass a budget in time for July 1st, do we need any special language to ensure that we can expend dollars in spite of the state's lack of funding at that time?
And we could confirm that, and if we do
that's all. I'm not looking
language,
for an
we
answer
could
today,
include
but
it.
I'm looking to make sure that we address that as part of our budget.
I think
motion.
Mr. Stoke, one of the ways to handle that is, I mean, I have to believe that state will pass a budget. It may not be next week. Most likely it's not going to be next week, but they're going to have a budget. That if that doesn't happen, we have a mid-year, we have a third quarter review, and that not having state revenue will have to be reflected when we do the review at that time. But again, I still have a faith in our elected representatives down in Richmond to pass a budget.
So the only issue is just, is there any particular other legal language that we need to include? And just if that could be confirmed, I understand, Mr. Mayor, and I concur that it's
We'll
likely
discuss
to be
that with Mr. Foster.
Thank you, sir.
Having said that, I want to echo what Mr. Stork has said earlier. Dr. Garza, our superintendent, has done yeoman's work and continuously, regularly engaging employee associations and their representatives in this budget deliberation, this process, and I thank you for doing that. It is my understanding that you met with association representatives as late as Friday before the budget work session, where you presented to the school board your latest proposal. So you are engaging them until the very, very last minute before you brought the proposal to the school board, and I thank you. And with that, let me just remind the board members that amendments are due by the close of business tomorrow. I know that many of us are waiting for more information from staff. Even if the language of your amendments is not finalized, whatever you have, please send them to Pam and other staff members, and so that Pam can share with Madam Clerk. Could share, could send to distribute to other board members, and the language will be, refined over the weekend and throughout the Monday. And we plan to post all the final amendments by the close of business on Monday. And thank you. With that, this work session is over.